1 week ago today, we got history's first trillionaire, and it's a little bit ironic that the recording number for this here on my computer is 69. If you're 14 years old, you just giggled a little bit because I guess we're about to get no, just kidding. But anyways, I'm making a video now, not necessarily on that topic, but I guess you can kind of plug in a little bit because in my last video, or well, it wasn't a video per se, tiny little bit of video, I talked about how there's this sort of epistemic divide that's getting deeper, even if it's not getting wider. And I used a couple technological examples in there, like video editing and internet forums and stuff like that. But no, I was not just talking about technology's contribution to the divide, because there's a lot of people who are sort of like purists or Puritans on this topic. Like they think technology is like more of a negative than it is a positive, and look at all the negative things it's doing to the world. No, I'm definitely not one of those people. I think advancement in technology has a net positive effect on civilization, or at least it has so far, and I think it will for the foreseeable future. Now I'll talk about, AI a little bit here in a second. That's not going to be the topic of this video either, but I'll talk about it a little bit. But I was not just talking about some of the negative effects from technology, because even if technology has a net positive, yeah, sure, there can be the couple of negative effects that I talked about in my last recording, but mostly there's going to be positive. So when I talked about this deepening divide, I'm not just talking about technology. I'm also talking about the fact that we have rising levels of education, right? You could say rising standards of living and therefore rising standards of education, which is good, right? We want the world to be more educated, and on average, humanity is more educated now than it has ever been. That's good, but like technology, there's a couple negatives where even that is one of the things that contributes to the deepening divide that I talked about in my last recording. You see, it's not just that you go and use technology to make some edited video where it really looks like all this unidentified aerial phenomena is like a bunch of alien craft. It's not just examples like those, like what I talked about in my last recording. It's also the fact that, for example, now people are on average more adept at using logic, which again is good, but then they go and try and use logic to support, for example, religious apologetics or all sorts of other arguments that aren't really correct. Now you might think, well, how could you use logic to support a wrong conclusion? It's actually pretty easy. I'll give you an example that a couple of you have heard me use before. It's a flat earth example. What if I said that the reason that the sun disappears at night is not because it vanishes over some horizon of some globe-shaped planet that we're standing on, so that it's just not there anymore relative to our perspective, because we're standing here on this globe, and now relative to our perspective the sun is over on the other side of this globe, so now there's a horizon separating us from the light of that sun, and so we do not see the sun anymore. Well, it's not that. Instead, the earth is flat. How would I say the earth is flat and that the sun is disappearing? Well, light gets refracted through the horizon, right? I mean, this is why as the sun sets, what's left of the sunlight shining through the atmosphere, it starts to blend into warmer colors, right? You start to see it turn more into shades of gold, orange, pink, red, right? Why does this happen during sunset, or for that matter, right after sunrise? Well, it's because, again, the sun now is at a lower angle relative to the atmosphere, at least the portion of the atmosphere that's directly overhead of us. And since it's at a lower angle, that means there's a longer length of atmosphere that the sun has to come into, right? Like it's kind of coming in at an angle, right? So there's more atmosphere that it's got to pierce through, whereas if it's like right overhead at noon, it's just like our tiny little slice of atmosphere right straight above our heads that the light has to come through. Whereas if it's coming in at an angle, it not only has to penetrate that entire depth, it's having to do it like sideways now. So it's having to travel further through a larger distance of atmosphere before it reaches the ground. And so since there's more atmosphere that the light is traveling through, more refraction happens. I mean, this is why you see, for example, if you put a straw in a glass of water, why does the straw look bent? Well, because fluids refract light, right? Not only does water refract light, but air refracts light. And since light gets refracted, well, that makes it easier for the shorter wavelengths of light to get scattered. The purples, the blues, the greens. So what's left over is more of the warmer colors because those are longer wavelengths of light. Colors like yellow or gold, orange, red. So that's why the sunlight looks warmer during sunrise or sunset. And this is actual science. I'm not even using a flat earth argument yet, but that's my point. You're going to see here in a second how this blends in to this sort of flat earth argument that I'm using as an example. Because this is actual science. Now, I may have not stated it quite correctly. I'm sure I misspoke a couple times in there because I'm not a full-fledged science communicator by any means, but I hope, learned this in middle school. I hope all of you in my audience learned this stuff in middle school, right? About light getting refracted by water or the air and why, the sunlight appears warmer in color, right? Longer wavelengths of light are less likely to get scattered, so they penetrate through the atmosphere. They quote-unquote survive, right? Survival of the fittest in that case, which is just obviously an analogy for that example, but you get what I mean. So yeah, that's all real science. But now what if I said, okay, well, the fact that the light is getting refracted means that now we could sort of envision this parabolic, however you would pronounce that, relationship where the sun's light is getting refracted so much that it keeps getting bent and bent and bent to an exponential degree, where it's sort of like if you see like those, I guess it would be an asymptote, not a parabola. But you see those charts in algebra and geometry where like it bends to infinity, right? Or like, for example, the graph approaches zero as it goes to infinity, so it just keeps getting bent lower and lower and lower exponentially. So we have this sort of relationship going on with the refraction of the light. It keeps getting bent further and further and further until eventually it's completely flattened. But at that point, if it's getting bent completely flat, well, it's no longer reaching us at any angle whatsoever. It's not just that the sunlight is no longer reaching us at a lower angle, like what we see during sunrise and sunset. No, it's no longer reaching us at any angle. It gets completely asymptotically bent. And so there's no sunlight reaching us. What happens when none of the light of an object reaches us? Well, we don't see it anymore. It's gone. Just vanishes, right? What if I said that that's why we don't see the sun at night? It's not that it's actually going below some sort of globe-shaped horizon. It's that the very refraction, which is, again, a scientific fact, it's responsible for what we see during sunrise and sunset. What if I said that that refraction of that light, it's bending and refracting so much that the light relative to our perspective gets entirely flattened, where we don't see any of the light anymore, and so the sun is gone. And you could even start to explain, well, why is it that at some point we see half of the light or whatever, like, or half of the sun? Well, wouldn't it just kind of slowly, disappear and turn into some like dark object like a black hole or something? Well, you could even say that here. Well, no, it's that as the light gets refracted, it kind of travels up the object. So like the lower portions of the sun get refracted more first, and then that refraction slowly travels up. So you see the lower half of the sun vanish before the upper half, and then eventually the entire object is just gone. So you're not just staring at some darkened black hole where it's just like a pit of darkness without any light reaching your eyes. No, you just don't see the object at all because the refraction just, proverbially speaking or analogously speaking, just slowly travels up the object until the entire object is bent out of view, or its light is bent out of view. So it doesn't actually need to go below any sort of horizon. The Earth can be completely flat with the sun overhead. So the sun is actually still overhead at night. It's just you cannot see the sun overhead at night because the atmosphere, this domed atmosphere that we have over this flat Earth, it's refracting the light so much that eventually it just gets bent out of view. So it's still up there. It's still up in the sky. We just cannot see it because the light's getting refracted too much. It's too far away now. There's too much atmosphere between us and the sun, and so there's too much refraction going on. Now, is any of what I just said correct? Well, the refraction stuff, like I said a few minutes ago, yeah, that's correct. But no, obviously this is not what's going on. The Earth is not flat. All the evidence unavoidably points to it being a globe that orbits the sun, and that's why the sun disappears relative to our perspective at night. But I want you to notice something about the entire model that I just delivered to you. I want you to notice that, first of all, it only used this concept of refraction, which again is scientifically proven. And then, yeah, you could say, okay, well, then it started introducing like parabolas or asymptotes or whatever and all that exponential bending and refraction. Okay, but is there anything illogical about that? Is there anything illogical about stuff getting bent further and further and further until they're flattened? Because recognize something, we're not saying that the light has to become infinite. No, when an asymptote kind of just bends to infinity like that, all you're doing is just flattening it, right? And stuff can very clearly get flattened in nature. So it doesn't actually have to approach infinity, so we don't even have to believe that the physical universe is infinite. When we say that this bending or this refraction is approaching infinity, all we're saying is, well, it's getting flattened until eventually it's entirely out of view. Because the light just gets bent completely downwards relative to our perspective, so it's reaching some other part of the planet now where it's daytime, but it's no longer reaching our perspective where it's nighttime, but it's still directly overhead. Well, not directly overhead, but you get what I mean. It's still revolving over the flat Earth. There's nothing illogical about that. There's no contradictions in there. There's no identity breaks. There's no non-bivalent truth values. I've talked about this before, how self-evident logic, or as it's called, classical logic, it works on top of three base axioms. You've got the law of identity, which is that things are themselves, right? An apple is an apple. Even if you want to redefine what an apple is, okay, well, yeah, we could obviously change what the word apple means tomorrow, where now the word apple means lemon, but okay, those lemons or apples or whatever we're calling them, they still are what they are. So things are themselves. That's the law of identity. Then there's a law of non-contradiction, which is that, you don't find things which are both themselves and not themselves. So a lemon is just a lemon. It's not a lemon and also a non-lemon. And then the law of excluded middle, which is that, if I point to some fact or some event, it is that way or it isn't some other way, right? I am speaking right now and I'm not being silent right now. So stuff is either happening or not happening. It's either real or not real. It's either true or false. That's the more formal way of stating it, is that every proposition is either true or false. There's no third value where stuff is both true and false or neither true nor false or some other weirder stuff. None of that. So as long as a model does not have any identity breaks, well, It's not violating the law of identity, right? It's not being itself. This entire model I just gave you, it is itself. There's no identity breaks in there. An asymptote is not also not an asymptote, right? The refraction is not also not refraction. Like there's no identity breaks anywhere in this model that I just told you about. There's no contradictions in it either. And there is certainly no non-bivalent truth values. There is nothing in there where I'm asking you to believe that something is both true and false or neither true nor false. No, there's just this atmosphere and this refraction and this and that. All that stuff is happening, and then there's all sorts of other stuff that's not happening. There's not some sort of globe orbiting a star. That's not happening, so that's just false. And then this sun is just revolving overhead and getting refracted as it travels further away from our perspective. That's just true. So there's no violation of the law of excluded middle either. So there's nothing illogical about this model that I've told you about. It is perfectly logically consistent. Great, but this is the point, that something being logically consistent or logical or rational or mathematically consistent does not mean that it is true. Proving something true requires, well, at least if you're working classically, requires that sort of logical consistency and then some, right? Like logical consistency is just the bare minimum when you're working within a classical framework, let alone if you're working outside of a classical framework. So your entire model can be perfectly mathematically consistent, logically consistent, perfectly valid. Okay, validity means nothing. You can make anything make sense. I kid you not, there are ways to create models that are perfectly consistent with all our laws of physics and cosmology, all the physical constants that we know about, even quantum mechanics, can have all of that except our universe is on the back of a turtle. You could make a model where we're on the back of a turtle make sense. Does that mean we're on the back of a turtle? No, you could also do it with a fucking lion or a bird or whatever. You can literally make anything make sense. So when I say that the rising standards of education are creating a couple negatives in terms of this deepening divide that I keep talking about, just like how technology, despite being a net positive, also is creating a couple negatives that contribute to that deepening divide. What I mean is that people are now learning to use logic and rationality and mathematics and all sorts of amazing tools, as they should, but then they go and they take those tools and they use them to create models and narratives and stories which are simply not true. But here's the thing, at least back in ancient times, when the average person was less educated and less logical on average, they were not able to dig themselves into as deep of a hole. They did not have all this logic and, oh, I've got an asymptote and shit, like all this stuff in my, like they didn't have all that in there. It was just, oh, well, I believe this because I had some experience or I had some vision or my elders told me about this or my tribe told me about it. Like it was very airy, very thin. It was probably relatively easy to talk them out of something. Now, obviously it still wouldn't have necessarily been easy, but my point is that nowadays the rising levels of education, on the one hand, they give us a lifeline where it's easier to pull people out of some sort of brainwash delusion, but on the other hand, it can directly contribute to the brainwashing. It can actually steep people deeper into their delusions, because now not only do they have some delusion in the first place, but they are now on average educated enough where they know enough about logic and math and science to then go and use that and throw up a YouTube video online. Oh, look, the Earth's flat. This is why. Have you ever watched all these videos of flat earthers? They're like pulling all this shit, super complicated math and calculus and physics. It's like, holy shit, where are they pulling this all from? And a lot of people laugh at it for good reason, but sometimes your mind can sit there and get a little bit scared because it's like, holy shit, some of this is actually kind of making sense. Why is it making sense? Well, because again, making sense means nothing. You can have a perfectly sensible, perfectly logical, non-contradictory, non-illogical, whatever model. Does not mean shit. Does not prove it. It doesn't prove it. Doesn't mean it's real. Anything can be made to make sense. We could be on the back of a turtle, and there's ways to make that make sense. And it's easier for us to make such crazy stuff make sense now because, again, we are more educated on average. This is also why you see the other example of religious apologetics that I used. And I'm not just talking about Christian apologetics, I'm talking about religious apologetics in general. You see it in like every major religion. Even New Age has its own forms of apologetics where these religious people are using logic and science and so on to argue that the Christian conception of God exists, or the Islamic conception of God exists, or the Jewish conception of God exists, or some sort of Mother Gaia Earth spirit exists, right? Like, that's why you see this stuff. This stuff did not exist to nearly the same degree centuries ago as it does now, because nowadays people are more educated on average. And again, that's good. That's a net positive, just like technology is a net positive, but there's a couple negatives there which contribute to this deepening divide, where people are getting more and more hammered into their domes, as I phrased it in my last recording. So like I said, it's not that violence between differing groups is getting worse. It's not that the gaps between us are widening. You know, as I said in that last recording also, we communicate quite well with each other. We communicate better with each other precisely because standards of education are rising and we have more technology to translate words and understand each other. So we're communicating very well. The gap is honestly probably narrowing rather than widening for that reason, but it's still deepening because our own education is being used against us. Not by some sort of elite cabal or like one world government, no, by our own minds. Our own minds are taking the logic and the science and the math, is all these tools we learn, and making sense of our own delusions. And so we get hammered into our domes. And so one of the reasons that I kind of brought up the news about Elon Musk being the first trillionaire, again, this is not going to be the topic of the video, just one of the reasons I started with it is because unfortunately this is really bad. The fact that people on average don't know what it means to prove something, to show or demonstrate that something is real. There's a difference between telling and showing. You gotta show that something is real. You can't just tell us some sort of narrative that's logically consistent and makes mathematical sense. You can't do all of that. That's not enough. It's about show and tell, like what we did in kindergarten. At least what I did in kindergarten. Maybe some other people did it. I don't know. Show and tell, right? You bring something to class, you show it to people, and then you tell them about it. It's show and tell. It's not just tell. But unfortunately, I look around, I see tons of people just telling us stuff. And what sucks about that is now with AI, again, I think AI is going to be a net positive for our society if it is utilized correctly. Where I get concerned about some potential negatives is when I look at who is in charge of this AI. It's a lot of billionaires who are closely connected. It is not a highly diverse class, which is a problem because if you have a larger pool of people networking together, it's more likely that their biases will cancel out the other biases in the group, right? This is why diversity is so important at universities. People go, oh, DEI, dumb woke shit. No, it isn't. Do you realize that one of the reasons, I'm not shitting you about this, I'm not just exaggerating to be like some leftist wokey, one of the reasons that we had so many advancements in the 20th century is because of all the diversity strategies that were being pushed in universities. Because let's face it, people don't think the same. Look at how much conflict there is all over the planet. Look at how differently we all think. People don't think the same. Yeah, you can find your group, you can find your people, you can live a life surrounded by people who think like you, but it's very easy to step outside that bubble and all of a sudden there's somebody else who thinks you're satanic or something, right? Like, we all think very differently from each other. The good thing about having groups and networks that are more diverse is that that means that you're more likely to find people who think so differently from you that they can likely see some sort of bias or biases that you have which your own mind is not catching. And so if you go into some sort of experiment and you gain some results from that experiment and you start looking at the data and interpreting it a certain way, maybe you're looking at that data with some potential biases. Well, guess what? Diversity means that a few of your colleagues are going to think so differently from you and see things so differently from you that they might be able to point out or catch some biases in terms of how you're interpreting the data that you missed. And now you'll think, well, Ethan, those people are biased too. Exactly. That's where you come in. You can now catch biases of their own that they're missing. It's this structure which sort of leans in on itself, right? The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It's not just a pool of dumb ape humans who are all biased and so they can't get anything right. No, each of the biases help to cancel out the other biases. Now, yeah, sure, it's not going to be 100% cancellation. There can still be a minor percentage left over, but the more education and the more diversity you get in there, the closer you can get to 100%, where it is possible to interpret experimental data with negligible biases. It is possible, right? I see a lot of people like, oh no, that's not possible, there's always going to be biases. Okay, well, they're just epistemic nihilists. It is possible to gain knowledge of something. It is possible. Mastery is possible. We do not need to be perfect. Perfection does not need to be possible because mastery is possible. You can master one topic, one experiment, one result, one fact. Yeah, that doesn't make you perfect. You're not God in like a religious sense, at least, right? You're not omniscient in some sort of religious sense where you just know every fact. I know a lot of people talk about God realization and God consciousness. That's why but you get what I mean, right? Like, you don't know every fact, but you don't need to know every fact in order to know one of them or some of them or even many of them. You can master those completely, and then yeah, there's still some other stuff that you have not mastered yet. So you're not going to know everything, but it is possible to know some things. It's even possible to know many things. So even if perfection is not possible, mastery is possible. Don't fall into this trap of epistemic nihilism of, oh, when scientists look at an experiment, they can never get their biases out. They can. They can. It is possible. Don't tell me it isn't. I've seen it work. It's possible. Does it happen all the time? Well, no. But it's possible, and it does happen. Diversity is one of the things that helps with that. And so why am I bringing all this up? Okay, back to the AI topic. We look at who's in charge of these AI programs. It's a very monotonous network of people who think very similarly, and they're actually not that educated. I know that's going to be kind of a controversial statement, but I'll explain what I mean. Like, let's look at Elon Musk for an example. He's often looked at as like this genius, like he's a genius in physics and engineering and so on. Okay, let me tell you something. He's a genius at something. He's a genius at business, investments, stuff like that. He is not an engineering genius. He has like a bachelor's in physics. I believe that's it. You can fact check me on that. But he's not like some sort of PhD in physics or some sort of engineering PhD. Um, and also, there was that time, what was it, like a year and a half ago? He posted these like derivatives or integrals, like these math problems and physics problems up on his Twitter page, kind of showing off like, oh, look how advanced I am, like look how good I am at physics. Okay, I'm a physics amateur. Even I was able to look at that paper and immediately notice what the fuck, like he's doing like calc 1 and calc 2 shit. Like it's not that advanced. Like that's not advanced physics. That's not advanced engineering. But then I thought to myself, okay, well maybe I'm just deluded, you know. He's this multi-hundred billionaire because again, remember this was a year and a half ago, so he wasn't a trillionaire yet. So maybe I was kind of thinking to myself, you know, okay, he's this multi-hundred billionaire. I'm sitting here, I'm worth nothing. So maybe I'm just deluding myself. Maybe my mind is talking shit about this guy, like, oh, he doesn't know advanced physics. He's bragging as if this basic stuff is advanced. And I'm just sitting here, I'm not making like any money in comparison to him. Like, hey, maybe I'm just deluding myself. But then I start to hear other physicists, like actual physicists and researchers independently of me, saying the same thing. He's just doing integrals and derivatives, and he just has a bachelor's in physics. It's like, okay. See, that's one of the ways you can tell when something is true, is when you reach your own conclusion independently, and then that conclusion is independently mirrored by people who have heavily mastered the topic. It's not just about thinking for yourself. That's like a bare minimum, which I'll talk about later. It's this third party independent verification where you know you're separated from these experts by space and time. You reach your own conclusion independently, and then they're without influence upon you saying the same thing, right? That whole third party dynamic. That's a strong indicator of truth. They were all saying the same thing that I thought. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I know enough about physics to recognize what he was doing. Elon Musk is not a physics genius. He's not an engineering genius. Obviously, he's a genius at doing business, and he's a genius at understanding which programs to invest in, because if he was not good at choosing programs to invest in, he would not be growing his money so exponentially. So yeah, sure, we can say he's like some sort of financial genius, like some sort of financial wizard. I don't mind giving that title to him. I mean, of course, people will say, well, he had a rich dad. And yeah, true. Like, he had some help. He had, you know, a pretty wealthy childhood that he grew up in. So obviously that helps, right? That certainly helps to kickstart it. But I mean, you got to remember, he had to grow his wealth from whatever he had then all the way up to trillionaire status, which is quite a gap, right? So obviously that would not have happened if he didn't at least have some knowledge about what programs to pick and choose and invest in. So we can say he's good at that. But this guy isn't like literally going and building rocket ships by himself. I don't know why people think that. He does not design the rockets for SpaceX, or at least he doesn't do all the engineering designs. He probably has like some hand in it, like a minor hand. But it's actually like all these SpaceX engineers and scientists that are hired by him. They're the real geniuses. And I know that because, again, I have friends who have gone here to my local university who are physics grads. I've talked about Franco, there's some others. Right? Like, not Franco specifically, but some of those people know these engineers, these physicists who get hired by these companies, right? It's not Elon in there doing his little integrals and derivatives and building rocket ships. It's entire teams of experts which he invests in. Again, like I said, he's good at knowing who or what to invest in. He invests money in those programs, and then it's those people who they go and build the rocket ships. It's not Elon. There's this weird, especially in certain groups, in certain political parties, there's like this weird image of Elon Musk as like this guy who like sits in a room and just like invents Neuralink or invents SpaceX or invents rocket ships or new ways to build a phone. Like that's a fantasy. That doesn't happen. You don't just sit in a room by yourself and design a new phone. There's teams of people that are invested in. They work all together. They build this stuff. All right, so what's my larger point? I've gone off on like 3 different side tangents. So let me wrap this back around to the point because you've probably forgotten the point by now. The point is that these billionaires like Elon Musk and so on, they're not as educated or as smart as the general public makes them out to be. Being rich doesn't automatically make you smart. Some of the smartest people I know are not rich. Yeah, there's smart rich people also, I'm not saying there's not, but there's not like some correlation there where like, oh, the richer you are, the smarter you are on average. Not really. So these guys who are running these AI companies, I know Elon Musk might not be the best example for AI. People typically think of like Sam Altman and guys like that, but same story for them, just a different kind of background. They're not as smart as the general public makes them out to be. And then on top of it, they're in these monotonous networks that, like I said, lack diversity. So you've got this group of people running probably the most innovative technology to have ever existed on the planet, or at least looks like it might be. AI looks pretty promising. Yeah, maybe their AI bubble will burst and it'll all turn out to be not nearly as innovative as we thought, but let's just say it is. Let's say this is going to be the most innovative thing to ever happen on the planet, at least technologically. You now have people in charge of this new technology who are not the smartest people. They're certainly not the dumbest, right? Certainly not the dumbest. They're not nearly the smartest, though, right? The smartest people on our planet are not generally the richest. They're not always dirt poor, but they're not generally the richest, right? They're not like intellectual elites, is what I'm saying. So they're not the smartest of us, and yet on top of that, they're working in these monotonous networks where they're unlikely to have their biases and delusions canceled out. And they're in charge of this technology, which is capable of feeding us all sorts of information, creating all sorts of video footage and data which looks real and looks convincing, right? AI programs can like hallucinate entire scientific papers which never existed and were never peer reviewed. Like it can create all this convincing information which, that should remind you of something, can deepen this divide and hammer us into our domes. Just like the flat earth model can make flat earth sound convincing. Just like religious apologetics can make any religion sound convincing. Just like video edited footage of UAP as alien craft can make the existence of alien craft in our skies look convincing. AI has a huge ability to do the thing that I'm talking about, to make things seem convincing and seem proven even when they're not. And so I'm concerned about the fact that the people running it have their own biases that they may intentionally or unintentionally push on the public. I think AI itself, again, will be a net positive, like I said earlier. I'm concerned about how it's going to be utilized. I'm concerned that it's going to be wielded to, again, deepen the divide that I've been talking about. And so it's becoming an increasingly dire question to ask ourselves. How do we tell what is real from what is fiction? We've already seen that question become more and more important over the past couple decades. It's only going to become more important over the next few years and beyond. How do you tell what is the truth? I get concerned that nobody is being taught how to tell what is the truth. Now, as I'm sure you've been able to tell already, I've become more academically inclined over the past couple years, right? I'm not as spiritual. I'm more into methodology, rigor, academic standards, right? A lot of people, as I've kind of said, a lot of people would be like, "Hey, he's stage orange now," right? Like I've become more hyper technical, and so I look at academia as like, okay, that needs to be our torch. That needs to be our beacon of light to help us forward, to help us not only keep rising standards of education, but properly use the education that we have so that we're not just affirming our own delusions like that flat earth model with all the light refraction that I talked about. And I think it can. I think universities have the tools and the methods for that because, I mean, I have a degree in philosophy. I graduated from a university as a philosophy major. So, I mean, I've been in philosophy classes and I see what they teach. And, like, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. Certainly a lot better than most, if not all, the stuff I've found on YouTube. So when people are like, oh, university is a waste, well, there's a lot of stuff in there that's not a waste. It teaches you how to think. Now, I've always had my own original methods even before I attended philosophy classes in college. So it's not like I got all of my content from a university. No, I've always had original stuff of my own, but there's other stuff that was in there which is certainly valuable to learn and can teach people how to think. So I think academia is capable of solving this problem, but the only, what's the word? The only problem I have with academia is I don't think they're tackling this problem as directly as they could or as they should. For example, the entire flat earth thing that I just told you about, you're not going to find that sort of a discussion in a university, which is ironic because the example I just gave you is an academic example. So I want you to notice something here. I'm going to create a sharp distinction for you because I want you to be able to see this distinction. There's a lot of other people on YouTube who will say the same thing I'm saying right now. That, oh, there's this problem I have with academia. They're not actually directly teaching people how to think. They'll say that, and then they'll try to teach you how to think, but what they end up doing is just inserting their own worldview into the picture. Whether it's like a religious person on YouTube, oh, universities don't teach you how to think, and then they just use that to sort of shoehorn in their religious apologetics. Or spiritual people, right? I've talked about Peter Ralston and Ken Wilber, Leo Gura, Deepak Chopra, Bashar, like all these people, they'll kind of say the same thing. These universities, these institutions, they don't teach you how to think, but then they go off on these tangents of, oh, well, your infinite consciousness and the law of attraction, right? Like Deepak Chopra, like they'll say these things where it's not just that they're not academic, it's that they're not, they don't demonstrate anything for themselves. I'll talk later in this what I mean by demonstrating things. They don't demonstrate things. They might make sense. They might be logical or rational. They might be coherent. But again, making sense means nothing. So when I say that there needs to be some sort of discussion going on for how academia can handle these types of problems going on in our society about how to tell truth from fiction, when I say that academia needs ways to handle that stuff more directly, I want to be careful to not just automatically insert my own stuff. Because clearly it's very easy to do that. Look at all the people who do it, just like I was talking about. There's a whole laundry list of people who do that. Oh, don't go to university to learn how to think. I'm going to teach you how to think. And then they just end up telling you what to think. And yeah, they'll tell you to kind of go off and research it for yourself or experience it for yourself. But ultimately, they're still standing there telling you something rather than something else, right? So yeah, they don't always expect you to just blindly trust them, but it's still them saying one thing rather than another. You know, Deepak Chopra, he's talking about law of attraction, and he's not talking about the Islamic conception of God. So yeah, sure, if you go to Deepak Chopra, he'll be like, I don't expect you to believe me. Go off and contemplate this stuff for yourself. Do the work for yourself. Okay, great. But at the end of the day, he's still telling something without showing something. Like I said, it's show and tell, it's not tell. So he is inserting a model in there that might make sense, and he's being all consistent, and he's being all non-dogmatic and telling you to go do it for yourself. Perfect. All that is so valid, it's so clean. But so was my flat earth model. That was also consistent. That also made sense. I could also just say, hey, go off and learn about refraction. We learned about it in science class, right? Go research that for yourself. That's the unfortunate part, is you can be as non-dogmatic and as logical and as consistent as can be. It still doesn't make what you're saying true. I think that is the deepest, darkest, harshest aspect of truth, is that you could be flawless, clean, shiny. Sorry, you're still deluded. That can happen. It happens a lot. I'm going to get into my own examples here in a few minutes. That's one of the things that I try to hold myself to a standard of. As much as I talk myself up and virtue signal, I also got to look at the faults in my own stuff. Like I took down a lot of my videos. In my last recording, I talked about only keeping 7.9% of my topics. I try to balance it out. I try to have a standard of humble pride. Be prideful in your strengths. Be humble in your weaknesses. So don't worry, I'm going to start to get into my own examples. The flat earth model, that was just a made up example. That's not something I actually used to teach or tell people is true. I'm going to get into some things that I did used to tell people were true, which get swatted down the same way. But anyways, we'll get to that later. Back to the point here now. When I say that there's some ways in which academia should be handling this societal problem more directly, I want to be careful to not just insert my own stuff into the equation. And so what I like about that flat earth example that I used earlier is that you can see, we're not like bringing in some sort of religious idea. I mean, we're bringing the idea of flat earth, but what I mean is we're just using it as an example. I'm not telling you about some sort of like religious concept and trying to prove that. I'm actually showing you the opposite. I'm showing you why it is that we can bring in a very religious concept like flat earth and make it make perfect sense, and still it turns out to be wrong. So I'm not inserting some sort of religious view. I'm doing the opposite. I'm not inserting any sort of law of attraction or spirituality or this or that. Instead, I'm showing you a principle which survives independently of any of that stuff. Whichever religion is true, if any of them are true, whichever spiritual topics are true, if any of them are true, whichever ideologies or ideas or theories are true, it will still be the case that anything can be made to make sense. It is a hyper-technical fact. It is so technical that it survives independently of any of that stuff. It will always be the case that anything can be made to make sense, because validity does not equal truth. Something can be valid without being sound, right? Soundness means truth. Something can be valid without being true. That is a pure technical fact about the universe, about ourselves, about our minds, and about our language. That's what makes it sound so academic rather than a lot of the non-academic examples where religious apologists will insert their worldview, or Deepak Chopra will insert his own thing, or Ken Wilber will insert his own thing, and whatever. Is that we're talking about very technical tools here. We're just talking about how methodology works, right? The difference between validity and truth. This is a very bare bones, very mechanical thing. It's dry, it's sterile. I've had people tell me that over the past couple years, as I've become more secular, a lot of my content has become more dry, right? It doesn't have all the colorful stuff about aliens and Bigfoot and other universes and this and that, right? Like all that colorful, flavorful stuff. It has become more dry, more bland, more sterile, more technical, more mechanical, more tool based, right? Like I said, a lot of people would consider it stage orange. And a lot of people would look at that and go, oh man, that sucks. But I actually consider it a good thing, an exciting thing, even. Most people would look at the transition I've made in my work and say, oh, well, it's boring now. If you look at it the right way, it's actually more exciting. Because if you can find facts that are that dry, that sterile, that mechanical, and that technical, you can find things that survive independently of any of the colorful variety that was there in the stuff I had before. Whether that stuff is true or not. I'll get into some more examples of that later. But one more thing I want to talk about is, people might think to themselves, well, how do you really tell the difference between a case in which we're being told what to think versus being taught how to think? Because Ethan, don't the lines blur a little bit? Can't the boundaries get a little bit fuzzy? Yeah, they could. I mean, here's a really easy example. What if I said, it is true that experience is happening right now? So I'm stating a very general claim here. I'm not saying there's inexperience happening or that there are experiences, plural, happening. So this is something that would survive independently of, for example, solipsism or non-solipsism, right? So I'm not being solipsistic and saying there's just one experience happening right now, nor am I being non-solipsistic and saying that there's many experiences happening right now. And I'm also not denying either of those. I'm just stating something that's so general that it'll be true regardless of whichever one of those is true. I'm saying there is experience happening right now. Whether it's one, whether it's many, this or that or the other, like it doesn't matter. There is experience happening right now. On the one hand, that sounds like a what, right? Because what are we talking about? We're talking about experience and the fact that it's happening. So it sounds like a what, but really, what qualifies something as a how rather than a what is precisely how broad and how general and how independent it is. If it's broad enough and general enough to be there no matter what, to be there independently of whatever claims are true or not, then even though it could still technically be considered a what, it's a general enough what to actually just be a how. So there's really no hard distinction between a what and a how. A how is just a special kind of what. Or rather, it's a more general kind of what. It's a what which is general enough to be there independently of whatever there is, right? It's a whatever what, right? It's a whatever what. So when I say there is experience happening right now, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm stating something so general where it's like, if you try to say, Ethan, you're indoctrinating me, right? Like, if I say there is experience happening right now and you're like, don't tell me what to think, Ethan. Don't indoctrinate me with that. Like, what am I even indoctrinating you with? Is it not the case that there is experience happening right now? Right? Like, yeah, technically it's a what, but it's such a general what that it's like, really all I'm doing is kind of just turning your attention inwards on some sort of fact that's just always here. The fact that I'm turning your attention in that way means I'm actually giving you a method for how to think, not what to think. It's technically a what, but it's performing a how. You see? So, yeah, the lines can be blurry. We do not need some sort of sharp, conclusive distinction between a what and a how. We just need to look for general enough whats such that they provide a how. And so over the past couple years, one of the reasons, well, really the main reason I've become so secular is because I look for those hows. I kept all the hows, I got rid of all the whats. Or at least that's what I've tried to do. Sure, you could argue maybe there's some that are still there and I just haven't noticed, but for the most part, that's the standard that I have held myself to. Get rid of all the whats, keep all the hows. Keep the stuff where even if it's a what, or even if it sounds like a what, it's broad enough to simultaneously be a how. So, I would like to see academia focus more on teaching us how to think, which it already does to some extent, but I think it can do it more directly. Because, like I said earlier, that flat earth model that I used as an example, where you can kind of create this perfectly valid, perfectly logical scheme, and it still turns out to be completely undemonstrable and untrue, I don't think there are classes in universities that give you such a blunt, harsh truth about logic. Now, again, this does not mean that we should throw away logic. Instead, what I'm saying is that there's a derivative of logical thinking. You could call it empirical thinking, where thinking logically and being able to come up with models that are perfectly consistent, yeah, that's good and all, but you need something extra in addition to that. I'm not telling you to not think logically. I'm telling you that you need to think logically and then some, right? Logic is the bare minimum. Misspeaking there. It's the bare minimum. It's not that you throw it away. It's that it's a foundation. That's it. But there's a lot of people who are merely using the foundation and thinking that that's the whole story. Like what flat earthers do, right? Flat earthers do the very thing that I did in my example. They use all sorts of logic and math and science, and then they're like, aha, look, that makes it true. No, it doesn't. Why? Because they're only doing the bare minimum. You got to do the bare minimum and then some. I think universities could do a better job of showing you just how bare and just how minimal logic is. I don't think they quite do a good enough example of that. How do I know? Because there's entire papers coming out of like mathematics departments about, like, for example, Norton's dome. I've seen that discussed, all over YouTube. Like one example would be like Kurt J. Mungle over on Theories of Everything. They're like, oh, Norton's dome proves that Newtonian mechanics is indeterminate. No, it doesn't. It only proves that Newtonian mechanics is indeterminate if there's an infinitely smooth surface. But that's the thing. If there's an infinitely smooth surface, we don't know if there's any surfaces in our universe that are infinitely smooth. If there were infinitely smooth surfaces, then yeah, those surfaces would break how Newtonian mechanics works. Now you may think, but Ethan, doesn't that kind of disprove Newtonian mechanics? No, because if you posit all sorts of stuff like an infinitely smooth dome or anything, like if you're allowing that sort of a method, you can break anything. Not just Newtonian mechanics, you can break anything. For example, if I say that there's stuff that's beyond absolute infinity, pure forwards implications, no backwards implications, which, as some of you know, that just means, like, for example, if you climb higher than a roof of a house, there's a forwards implication, which is that you're higher than the height of the house. But then that comes packaged with a backwards implication of, well, that means that the house's roof is lower than you, right? Like the house's roof has a limited height. It's not able to reach as high as you are, right? The backwards implication comes packaged with the forwards implication, right? If you're higher than the thing, then the thing is too limited to be as high as you. And people think that way all the time. They'll hear about topics beyond absolute infinity and be like, well, that means that absolute infinity is limited. No. You're using backwards implications. Consider that there might be stuff which operates on pure forwards implications, no backwards implications. So somehow you could be ahead of it while the thing is still entirely unrestricted. It has no backwards implications. It's one directional. Sucks that that's, the name of a band, almost, well, One Direction, not one directional, but you get what I mean. It's one directional. It points ever north. It does not point back down. It's monopolar, right? By being ahead of the thing, that does not dethrone the status of the thing. That's what pure forwards implications means. So anyways, back to the point there. We've got this pure forwards implication stuff. So I could just throw that stuff on the table as a proposition and propose to you that if there is such a stuff as that stuff, then all of mathematics, and not even just mathematics, like any notions of infinity or anything or everything, since absolute infinity is absolutely boundless, like anything and everything, even your direct experience, like all that gets broken. Like even the fact that there is experience happening, that fact that I used as an example a few minutes ago, even that can get broken. In fact, there's ways to break that even just with boundlessness or infinity. We don't even have to go pure forwards implications beyond in order to start entertaining stuff that is that radical. So if I throw pure forwards implications beyondness onto the table, we could get really damn crazy. So if you just start pitching stuff saying this could be there, that could be there, then you could break anything. That's all that Norton's dome is doing. It's just doing it to a less radical degree, obviously, right? It's not breaking the fact that there is experience happening right now, nor is it breaking further past some ceilingless ceiling of absolute infinity with pure forwards implications. It's not breaking any of that, but it's breaking Newtonian mechanics. Why is it able to break Newtonian mechanics? Because you can pitch any sort of idea, and if you make it the right way, it can accomplish anything. So if you just craft this concept of an infinitely smooth dome, you've crafted something that breaks Newtonian mechanics. I just crafted something that breaks 100% certainty and the fact that there's experience happening right now, right? Like you can break that stuff. You can break anything. That does not prove that it's there. It does not prove that it's real, right? Like me saying all that stuff about pure forwards implications, that alone does not prove that that stuff is real. I would have to demonstrate to you that it is real, which, I mean, those are kinds of topics that I do talk about, not necessarily here on my YouTube channel, but there are ways to demonstrate all sorts of radical topics. I'm not going to get into that here because it takes too long, and it's not the point. I can do it later. I mean, I also already have like some exclusive stuff on it. But anyways, point being, that alone does not prove them. I have to go into some demonstrability in order to try to show that it's genuine. So it's the same for Norton's dome. Simply crafting the dome and its infinite smoothness does not prove it. You got to demonstrate that there is such a dome, or that there are such domes, or that such a dome concept pertains to the nature of our universe in some way, right? Like you don't have to literally have some physical dome somewhere. If you find some way in which the geometry of, for example, space-time corresponds to the idea of Norton's dome, then sure, then you could claim that Newtonian mechanics is actually indeterminate in the nature of the universe. So Norton's dome does not prove that Newtonian mechanics is broken, and then this leads to some arguments between mathematicians and physicists, where you would think a person who's as crazy as me and has ideas as crazy as mine, you would think I would be on the more abstract side Like, you would think I would be on the side of the mathematicians in this debate, going, yeah, Norton's dome, this is how it shows indeterminacy in Newtonian mechanics and all that. You would think I would be on that side, but ironically, I'm on the more concrete side. I actually side with the physicists when they say, okay, great, you've drawn up some infinitely smooth structure. Show us that it's real. If it isn't, sorry, Newtonian mechanics, yeah, it's incomplete. Obviously, Einstein's physics extends further, so it's not that Newtonian mechanics is complete, but it's certainly not indeterminate. If you want to show it's indeterminate, you got to actually find a dome or show that there is a dome, right? Either empirically find one or prove that there is one, like show that there is one. I agree with the physicists on that. It's just I agree with them from a top-down direction, whereas they agree from a bottom-up direction. They're obviously not going into all sorts of crazy shit about pure forwards implications. I am, but it leads to the same place from above as from below. Which is ironic, right? The more radical you get, ironically, you kind of just come full circle on the concrete. It's concrete, then it gets more and more abstract. Ironically, it just becomes concrete again. So Norton's dome doesn't prove anything except for the fact that there are mathematically consistent structures which, if they existed, would render Newtonian mechanics indeterminate. And yet, despite the fact that Norton's dome doesn't prove such a thing actually exists, there's still all these mathematicians in math departments at universities who are getting into all these arguments with physicists saying, yeah, it proves this, it proves that, and no, it doesn't. Norton's dome, in that sense, is really just a far more advanced and far more sophisticated version of my flat earth model. Does that mean that mathematicians are as stupid as flat earthers? No, not even fucking close. You could learn a fuck ton from mathematicians at university, right? Like, there's a lot in mathematics that is factual, right? I'm not saying all of it is trash. I'm just saying Norton's dome is trash. So no, mathematicians, it's not just that mathematicians are smarter than flat earthers. Mathematicians are smart. Flat earthers, at least on average, aren't. They can be very intelligent. That doesn't make them smart. I actually use those terms differently. When I say intelligent, I mean like that's your ability to use logic and rationality and validity, like what I talked about. Smarts, I would say, is like how correct is your stuff, like how true is it actually, like how aligned are you with truth. I guess another term for that would just be knowledgeable, right? So you could say intelligent versus knowledgeable, but I just, as a shorthand, I say intelligent versus smart. You can have some very intelligent people who are not smart at all. You could also, in some ways, have the opposite too, right? A very smart person who kind of just gets there. That one's harder, though. It's harder to get there because smarts technically requires method, but I can get into that another time. Anyways, though, we see this at universities. Even though mathematicians are way smarter, not just more intelligent, but smarter than flat earthers, still you kind of just get a lot of cases in which there's more sophisticated versions of that. And so they write up entire papers and go, look, Norton's dome is logical, it's mathematical, therefore it proves that Newtonian mechanics is indeterminate. Like, this is what I'm saying, that universities need to show how bare and how minimal logic is more, like what I did in my flat earth example. One of the reasons that I think they don't is maybe they're a little bit afraid that it'll send the wrong message, right? Like, it sounds a little bit radical, like it almost sounds like you're throwing logic under the bus, right? To say that logic can be dangerous. But that's the irony. It's possible to misuse logic without even being illogical. It's not like you're just doing things that you think are logical. No, they actually are logically valid. There's no identity breaks, no non-contradictions, no non-bivalent truth values, and yet what you're saying still isn't correct. It can still even be dangerous. For example, I've seen this a lot in cults, not just in flat earth. Um, I've talked to people who have come out of high control groups and even some cults. It's one of the things I do in my free time, oddly enough. Um, and of course, as a lot of people just do on their own, I've watched a lot of cult documentaries. Do you want to know the four most common words I hear from people leaving cults? It just made sense. When you ask them, why'd you believe in any of that? How could you have ever believed in any of that? It just made sense. You'll hear some variation of those four words, if not those four words exactly. It just made sense. For example, there's I'm only bringing up this one just because, again, I used to be into spirituality, so of course I've heard about this one, and I imagine a few of you in my audience have heard about it. But recently there's been these interviews with some people who have left Bentinho Massaro's group. It's like, how the hell, like, some people look at them and go, how the hell could they have ever believed in any of that? This guy was saying that, like, having sex with him is, like, magical and healing, right? It's like, how could you ever believe he's some sort of magic man like that? Like, isn't it obvious that he's just trying to get you to have sex with him? People don't understand. It's not just the fact that logic can be misused. In the case of Bentinho's, ironically, you actually don't see as much of that. But there's another angle here, which is experience. People can have experiences of their own, which make them more inclined to take a certain set of ideas seriously. For example, let's say there's a UFO cult. I feel like those are typically the craziest ones that people hear about. All these UFO cults that exist or have existed, like Heaven's Gate is the famous example. That was the name, right? Heaven's Gate. I'm not misremembering that. Heaven's Gate. Correct me if I'm wrong. People look at that. How the fuck could people believe in any of that? Well, picture this. Picture if you have a lot of very tangible experiences. I mean, I have very tangible experiences where I talk to aliens. I still have them. I don't even believe or take a position on whether or not they're real anymore. I still talk to them. Picture somebody having tangible experiences of meeting aliens. Whether the aliens are real or not, the experiences are real in the sense that they're happening, right? The person is experiencing these experiences and they're very tangible. So they become convinced that they are meeting aliens on a regular basis. If you have an experience like that, which does happen, it's a minority of people, but there's a lot of people still who have tangible experiences of meeting aliens. Even if they're just an experience, they still happen. They become convinced, therefore, that they've met aliens. Now you come across some UFO cult. Yeah, they're saying all sorts of crazy things about aliens and stuff, but you've met them, so what sounds so crazy to you? This is a lot of the reason how cults start. Now, I know it's not always the case. Some people will just get into a cult without any prior experience of any of the stuff that's being talked about. But even if they don't have some sort of like literal explicit experiences, there's still something or some things that have happened in their life which make the ideas feel more tangible and feel as though they're more worth taking seriously. So for example, even if it's not a literal explicit experience of tangibly meeting aliens, maybe you saw a light in the sky. Maybe as a kid you always were deeply interested in aliens and you always read scientific books about aliens and how, it's possible that the cosmos is populated with aliens, right? Like, you can have more subtle life experiences which still prime you to take the ideas of a cult seriously. And so, yeah, you might look at people like having sex with Bentinho Massaro. How the hell could they ever believe him when he says that he's like magical in bed and that he is like healing and divine to have sex with him? Like, how could you ever look at that and think that that's worth taking seriously? It's like, well, guess what? lots of people have experiences of having some sort of divine mystical feeling while they're having sex. Like, that happens. It happens a lot. So now somebody comes along and says, hey, you want to be spiritually healed? Have sex with me. Like, it's easier to take it seriously. I don't know though. Maybe I'm just viewing those people who left Bentinho's group with rose-tinted glasses because I think Jacqueline's hot. I mean, I don't know, but like whatever the thing is, like it happens where people have either experiences that prime them to take something seriously, or again, the logic thing I was talking about with the flat Earth model, that happens a lot too. So for whatever reason, whether it's experientially or logically, um, yeah, crazy ideas can be made to make sense. It's kind of the irony where if you ever look in the comments section under crazy videos about crazy topics, like what cults believed in, people will be like, God, how like they thought this and they thought this and they thought this, and they'll be like, people, make it make sense, right? They'll always say that, make it make sense. The ironic thing is, you can make it make sense. That's the scary part. You can make it make sense. I know how to make the crazy stuff make sense because I was born with it. I grew up with it. All the experiences that I've had throughout my life and still have, I had to learn very quickly how to tell what's real from what isn't. Even deeper than that, I had to learn how to tell whether or not real itself is even legit. I was raised in a pressure cooker. Just due to my own condition, I had to learn that just to even survive. And yet, learn it without it becoming a matter of survival. Because if it becomes a matter of survival, that becomes its own problem. Then you really get entrenched in your own biases. So that's quite a feedback loop, isn't it? Picture living your whole life in that feedback loop. Boundless, for lack of better terms. That's my life. That's this Ethan life. And the larger life experience, whatever that is, right? Whatever we want to say that is. Again, how's not what's. But that's how I've come to see that you can make it make sense. Any of it. So, I mean, maybe we should transition into some of those, right? But you know what? One more thing. I keep saying I'm going to transition and then I don't. One more thing. Point here being, when I say that logic can be dangerous, again, I don't want that to mean that logic is trash. That fact I said earlier about there is experience happening right now, that's a self-evident fact, right? That right there is logic. Logic is not just some sort of mechanical thing detached from experience. It is experiential, right? The fact that there is experience happening right now, that is logical. It may not be what people think of as logical, but logic is much more fluid, much more graceful, much more universal than people typically think of it as. They usually think of it as being this sort of robotic, mechanical thing that's detached from life and detached from experience. No, it's not just this cold thing. It's very warm and very encompassing. Like the fact that there is experience happening right now. Notice how independent and how encompassing and how broad that fact is. Like I said earlier, it's so broad that it's not just a what, it's a how. That's why teaching people how to think often involves teaching them logic, right? It's because of the fact that logic is very broad and very encompassing, like the fact that there is experience happening right now. You can go broader, that's some other topics that I can bring up, or that a few of you have already heard me bring up with like kinetic studies and that sort of stuff. I won't go into that here, but anyways, so point being, Don't throw out logic. When I say that logic can be dangerous, what I mean is that it can be misused. The flat earth model is not illogical in any sorts of ways. It's perfectly valid. Still not correct. Lots of cults don't have anything illogical in their beliefs either. There's no contradictions in them. Yeah, you find a lot of cults where their ideas contradict themselves. That happens. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance. But there's also a lot of cults where there's no dissonance. There's no contradictions, no identity breaks. Things fit together. It's a perfectly internally consistent model. Okay, great. Still does not make it correct. And in fact, not only do they turn out incorrect, they turn out dangerous. So yes, logic can be dangerous. I think that sounds a little bit too radical to teach in a university, but I think it needs to be taught in universities. Because again, I'm not advocating for anything non-academic here. Yeah, it's non-academic in the sense that, well, obviously it's not being taught in academia right now, at least not explicitly. It's taught more indirectly in some cases. But what I mean is that, like, qualitatively it's academic. It shares the same methods and features of what you find if you're taking a logic class or an epistemology class or any sort of philosophy class at a university. Like, I'm not sharing any methods with you that stray away from the methods and the tools that you learn at a university. That's what I mean by academic. So it's qualitatively academic. It's just that, yeah, it's non-academic in the sense that it's not being taught in universities, at least not as prominently as I think it should be taught. So I'm being sort of like, you'd either say non-academically academic, or I guess a better way to phrase it would be academically non-academic, right? Like, I'm advocating for something new that's not fully taught in academia, but it's a qualitatively academic thing. Like, you're not straying away from what's already there. You're just emphasizing it more. Right? Again, we're not talking about Deepak Chopra, law of attraction, like, oh, I think that should be taught in universities, which I have heard people say. I've heard, oh, we should teach that. Why don't people teach that in universities? I wonder why not. But no, when I'm talking about here, I mean, this is very academic. Logic can be misused. Again, like I was talking about that Norton's Dome debate. There's these debates sometimes between mathematicians and physicists where physicists are like, hey, you mathematicians are trying to tell us that Norton's Dome shows Newtonian mechanics to be indeterminate. Sorry, no, it doesn't. So, like, that sits right on the back of what I'm talking about. That's something being perfectly mathematically and logically consistent, like Norton's Dome, doesn't prove it to be true. Not automatically. Right? So it's there in academia already. It's there implicitly. I think it just needs to be taught explicitly. And the reason I think it needs to be taught explicitly is because that helps people avoid cults. Not just cults, there's more subtle forms of being led astray, getting scammed, right? Misinformation, medical misinformation. Good God, medical information right now, it's all over the place. The internet has allowed that shit to thrive, let me tell you. Medical misinformation, financial misinformation, getting scammed. And then the extreme end of that bell curve is getting trapped in a cult. People keep wondering, why the hell do these cults keep popping up over and over and over and over again? They happen so much. Did we not learn anything from Charles Manson? Did we not learn anything from Heaven's Gate? We don't learn anything because there's no robust institutional classes on it. There are no robust institutional classes on it. But there should be. We need to really show how logic is just the bare minimum, and that if you don't respect the fact that it's the bare minimum, yeah, it can very quickly get dangerous. Not only logic, but direct experience. So now let's finally turn our attention to that. Just a little warning here, if you don't like graphic content, I would not listen to the next few minutes. I'm going to start off with some darker experiences, and slowly kind of work my way up to some brighter and more beautiful experiences, right? Go through hell to get to heaven, as they would say. Um, and I'm not going to be talking about like experiences from my boundless condition, because obviously every sort of experience is in there, right? For lack of better terms, it's already in there. I'm going to be talking about personal Ethan experiences. So these are experiences that are experienced in the same way as me here as Ethan speaking to you right now into this recording is an experience, right? The same kind of experience as this. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Start off dark, get brighter and brighter and brighter. So eventually you'll hear stuff which is better. It's just, it might start off a little bit frightening. For the last couple years, actually no, not even the last couple years, a few years. It's been 5 years now. The last 5 years has gone, wow, really fast. I have been having, again, personal Ethan experiences with dinosaurs. Are these real? I don't believe so. But before I continue with the story, let me make another distinction there. There's a difference between lack of belief and belief in lack. For example, is there a tiny little pyramid-shaped stone, maybe like only a foot high, some tiny little pyramid-shaped stone? Is there something like that up on Mars? And I'm not talking about some artificial structure. I just mean, let's conceive of some naturally formed pyramid-shaped stone laying somewhere up on Mars. Is there something like that? Well, there's no reason to believe there is, because we haven't scanned the entire surface of Mars, right? You're talking about a naturally formed pyramid-shaped structure. Like, it's hard for nature to form perfect geometric shapes like that. So it's possible that across the entire surface of Mars, there's nothing like that. Even if we're only talking a foot high, still, a smaller stone like that, perfectly shaped into a pyramid, it's hard for nature to do that. So it's very possible that there's just nothing like that up on Mars. So there's no reason to believe that there's something like that on Mars, because if you go and believe it, you could very likely be wrong. But at the same time, nature has shown an ability to sometimes, just by pure statistics, form very orderly structures. If you want a more frequent example, look at snowflakes. Obviously we're talking about stones, it's a lot harder, but like snowflakes are one example where nature can quite frequently form geometric structures. Seashells, things like that too, right? So it happens, and the fact that it happens means, well, wait a minute, hold on, maybe there is a stone like that up on Mars. Maybe there is a foot-high, pyramid-shaped, naturally formed stone laying on Mars right now as we speak. So, okay, there's no reason to believe there is, but it would be foolish to just automatically say that there isn't. So what position do you take? That's where, it's possible to say there's no reason to believe something without believing that there isn't that something. What you do is just say, I don't hold any particular opinion. I don't have any particular belief. The most common example I hear is atheism. A lot of people think atheism means believing that there's no God. Some atheists are that way, but that's a minority. Hell, I'll even grant you that a lot of atheists are that way, but it's still a minority, right? A minority is not a rarity. You can have a lot of people and still that entire lot of people can be a minority. It's a minority of atheists who are like, yeah, I believe there's no God. Most atheists, especially the academic atheists, they just simply don't believe that there's a God. It's not that they believe there isn't a God, they just don't believe there's one. Why? Well, because they haven't seen any sort of compelling demonstration that there is. So like the rock on Mars, they recognize, hey, could be there, right? Maybe there is a God. Could very well be there. So it'd be foolish to be like, hey man, no such thing. At the same time though, is there any reason to believe there's one? Well, not really. All the arguments for God kind of suck. Actually, like, really suck. Like, let me just share my own opinion there. I can talk about arguments for God another time. There's some that I would consider the strongest, but even they are not good at. So it's like you can't blame atheists for not being convinced because the arguments are really pretty bad. Um, but yeah, okay, so there's no reason to believe in God, just like there's no reason to believe in the stone on Mars. But it'd be foolish to say that there isn't. So you can lack belief in something without believing in the lack of that something. That is what true skepticism is. So, point here being that with a lot of my experiences, that's the position I have. I lack belief in them. I'm going to talk about all sorts of like seemingly psychic experiences I've had after these dinosaur ones. I'm going to talk about a lot of them. And, you know, yeah, they happen. The experiences happen. They happen. They continue to happen. And so, like, okay, sure, maybe there's something there. There could be something there, but there's no reason to think there is. So if you ask me, Ethan, these dinosaurs you're about to talk about, and it's not just dinosaurs. I'm actually going to start with a marine reptile, which is a little bit different. Marine reptiles aren't formally categorized as dinosaurs, but they lived alongside dinosaurs, so that's why people call them that. Dinosaurs, marine reptiles, whatever. Ethan, do you believe that your experiences with them are real? I don't see any reason to believe that they are. Honestly, no reason. Zero, nada, zilch. I do not see any reason to believe that they're real. Could they be? Well, sure, yeah, technically anything's possible. Does not mean I believe that they are. It does not even mean I believe that maybe they are. It's not just that I'm putting some sort of partial percentage in there, like some sort of pure agnostic, like, oh, well, maybe they're real, maybe they're not. Like, no, flat out zero, I do not see any reason to believe that they are. But sure, yeah, like, technically they could be. So I'm not going to believe that they aren't. I'm just not going to believe that they are. Right? That's the difference between, in the God case, a pure agnostic versus an atheist. An atheist can also be an agnostic, right? You can be an atheist and then be like, well, yeah, I don't know whether or not there's a God. But a pure agnostic would be somewhere between like an atheist and a theist. Like, oh, maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't. Like, I don't know what to believe. I don't even know whether to lack belief, like how the atheist does, right? So I'm not just some pure agnostic. I'm more like the atheist with regards to my experiences, at least most of them. Some of them I'm flat out in the other direction. I believe that they're actually not there. So there are some where I actually do go as far as believing in the lack of them rather than just lacking belief in them. But most, if not all, of the ones that I'm going to bring up here, it's going to be just lack of belief, like the case of the stone up on Mars. So it's more equivalent to an atheist than a pure agnostic. And so obviously atheism, that's a term which relates to belief in God. So that's not going to hold here. I came up with my own term. I call it apistic. So agnostic means lack of knowledge, right? Because gnosis, as in Gnostic, means knowledge. So to be agnostic means to lack knowledge. There's another term, pistis, or pistic, which means belief. So apistic is lacking belief. So again, atheists can be agnostic, but a pure agnostic will not go as far as just pure lack of belief. So they're not going to be like either of the forms of atheism. Because instead of purely lacking belief or believing in pure lack, they're just going to be kind of stuck in this partial percentage middle zone maybe section, right? And so I'm not going to call myself an atheist with regards to these dinosaur experiences because theism doesn't relate to dinosaurs. So what do you mean, right? So you call it apistic, right? An atheist is apistic with regards to the topic of God. I am apistic with regards to these experiences that I'm about to go over. Most, if not all of them. I'm apistic. I completely lack belief in them. That does not mean that I believe in the lack of them. That's a different story. All right, with that said, let's go into also, god damn it, I keep thinking of more stuff to bring up. There's so many goddamn disclaimers. Another thing I'm gonna bring up. All right, another disclaimer. Like I said earlier, humble pride. I'm gonna share a lot of experiences that are gonna bring out a lot of pride for obvious reasons. Brag about myself quite a bit. But there's also going to be a lot of cases where, God, they really show some shortcomings, right? So a lot of humility in there. I guess that's the good thing about humble pride. You know, you're always worried, like, well, you want to be humble, but without it being just a sort of false humility, right? Um, there's people who have humility where it's like they're just always talking down on themselves, and at that point, you kind of have to wonder, is it even genuine? Surely they must have some sort of high self-esteem about some aspects of themselves, right? So I guess it's a little bit easier to check yourself and hold yourself accountable and make sure you're being authentic if you have humble pride rather than just pure humility. Because with pure humility, where you're always shooting yourself down, it's like, dude, surely you don't think that everything you think is wrong, right? Like, it seems like we all think that at least some of the things we think are correct, right? So have a little bit of pride in yourself. You do think that you have smarts on some stuff. I think that I have some smarts on some stuff. So there's pride there, but there's also humility. I know that there are cases where I don't know. So that's why I shoot for humble pride. So you're going to hear both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. You'll hear me narcissistically assert myself and promote myself. You'll also hear the shortcomings. Speaking of shortcomings, god damn it. It's fucking hot in here. Taking my shirt off. I have the AC on. It's in the 60s. I still just get warm, especially while I'm talking. Everyone's thinking to themselves, god damn it, even with the camera turned off, he has his shirt off. Yep. That's what I'm telling you. It's not just me trying to show off. I mean, I guess that's a bonus, but yeah, no, I genuinely just get really warm sometimes. And I don't want to turn the AC down into the 50s. That's stupid. Yeah, I get warm sometimes, so take off my shirt. Anyways, that's all good now. Got a water here. You'll keep hearing me sip from that, as you've likely heard a few times so far. So, also, if you've skipped ahead and you're tuning back in now, sorry, I have not gotten past the graphic part yet. I said it was going to be the next few minutes, and then I went off on another side tangent, as those of you who have stuck with me heard. So, give yourself another few minutes. Skip further ahead. As you can tell, I'm too lazy to edit anything, so sorry, I wish I could give you more precise measurements. But anyways, I have been personally having experiences with, there's two main types of prehistoric animals, and then there's a third one that kind of appears sometimes, but it hasn't really been prominent. To get that one out of the way, it's a mosasaur. I haven't seen that one that much. The two main ones are T-Rexes and plesiosaurs. Wow, the shortcomings are already showing up. I couldn't even figure out whether to say asymptote or parabola earlier. And that's middle school math. I don't know how to pronounce plesiosaur. Whatever, I'll say plesiosaur. I have a cousin who's into ancient animals, you know, dinosaurs, marine reptiles. I believe she said it was plesiosaur. I'm going to risk being wrong and say plesiosaur, but note, plesiosaur is more natural to me, so you're probably going to hear me just accidentally say that. God damn it, fuck. Sorry, something came up. I'll talk about that more in a second. There are some, not PTSD. I was diagnosed with, they call it like a post-trauma response. So like, okay, PTSD, that's a specific kind of post-trauma response, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. I was not specifically diagnosed with that. And the only reason I wasn't is because, again, it's not just that I have some of these uglier experiences. I also have a lot of more beautiful ones, which luckily balance it out enough where I don't go insane or get driven into high stress by these experiences. It's only because I'm privileged enough and blessed enough to have the other experiences along with it. If I didn't have those, surely these things would cause me a lot more stress, where I would have a post-traumatic stress response or a post-traumatic stress disorder. So I have a post-trauma response, but it's not PTSD. It's a more general umbrella term. So if you're wondering how I'm even able to remain as calm and as sane as I have, that's how. The post-trauma responses are there, but luckily it has not broken that. It has not led to the kind of stress that you would find in PTSD. But there are still responses, so I'll talk about those soon. Picture being tangibly. It feels physical. Whether it's physical or not, it certainly feels physical. Picture being hundreds of meters away from land. God damn, I can feel my throat actually kind of closing up a little bit. I'm going to have to move slow. Like I said, I can remain calm. It's just the responses are going to be there, even as I start to speak about it. So it'll be a little slower. Like, I'll be calm. You're not going to hear me like freak out like a PTSD case, but it is going to have effects on my body a little bit talking about it. Picture being God damn it. Alright, we're gonna power through this. Picture being hundreds of meters away. God fuck. More shortcomings. This is harder than I thought it was gonna be. Hundreds of meters away from land. You're in the water. Up to your up to your stomach, right below your chest, right below your nipples, that area floating. Except you're not floating. God damn it. God damn it. Fucking hell. You're not floating. You're, okay, so, you know you have, like, those strings with the pins on the end that they, like, latch onto stuff? And so if you, like, shake the thing, God damn it. Fuck. Like, you shake the object around, you can feel the string and the pin attached onto it. Like, it feels tethered. There's that feeling that comes with something being tethered. God damn it. Fucking throat. What makes it hard to talk is my throat closes up. It's like, you know, like before you throw up, like your throat, god damn. Or if you ever like jump into cold water, you know how like you freeze up, like your chest, you have that like feeling, right? Like you run out of breath, like, you know, it's like your chest tightens, your throat closes up. It doesn't quite feel like throwing up because there's not a nausea to it, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm nauseous right now. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just that throat close. The chest and throat, the right? Like it suctions up through your sternum like that. Like as soon as you jump into a pool of ice cold water, that's what keeps happening just as I talk. And it's not even the water in the experience is doing it. I'm not saying the water's cold. It's actually very, god fucking damn it. The water is so bathtub warm. God fucking damn it, I hate talking about this. Jesus. Yeah, like I said, if it wasn't for the more beautiful experiences, I would not be able to hold up this sort of enlightened, calm image that I have where you're just kind of calm through anything. Because these types of experiences, man, getting attacked by a lion, that's going to hurt you no matter how enlightened you are. I don't care what you say. Oh, God, that pain is real even if suffering isn't. I only say that because some enlightened gurus and masters make that distinction. They talk about pain versus suffering. Let me tell you, there's pain in these experiences, even if they're not real. There is actual pain. So even if there's no like whatever you would call suffering, like mental anguish, the throat closing is there, the pain is there, the survival triggers are there, right? The need to just get out, like swim out of the situation. I mean, that's just a human response. Everybody's going to do that, right? An enlightened master is going to jump out of the way of a car. But whatever. Hell, hearing about this, maybe you're like, fuck that, Ethan, you're just not enlightened. Whatever shortcomings are revealed throughout any of this, they're there. But it is going to be harder to get through it. So, bathtub warm. Why even saying that? Again, the water's not cold. Even mentioning how warm it is. Jesus Christ. Fucking. It is not a relaxing kind of warmth at all. God damn. Not at all. Muggy. How can water be muggy? Dirty. Fucking Jesus Christ. I hate that. Clear enough to see down in it, but still dirty and muggy and warm. Ugh. And then your body's not floating. You feel, you have that tethered feeling I was talking about, except it's not a string. Not a string with a pin attached. A fucking I'm just gonna fucking say it. 10-foot long neck. Picture grabbing around that thing. It's like trying to wrap your hands around a python. That neck. It's so wide around you can't wrap your hands around the damn thing. 10 feet long, like a snake or a serpent, all on its own, and then, god damn it, there's the fucking body. 10 feet out in front of you as you're tethered, not floating, tethered to this thing in the water. Its mouth is the pin, latched into your intestines, under your rib cage. Blood gushing out. You hear growls bubbling up from under the water. Again, I don't know if plesiosaurs actually growled. I don't know if any of this is real. I don't believe it is. If it is, I don't believe it is. I don't know if it is. I don't know if they actually growled. This could just be a fiction. Growls bubbling up from under the water. Blood pooling. Muddy, bloody, dirty, clear, all at the same time. Throat closing. All around you. The growls bubble up to the surface. You see the bubbles. You hear the growling. You feel what it's like for the flesh in your intestines to get torn by razors. They're not razors, they're teeth. You feel that under the water. You ever tear apart celery where it's like it's sinewy and fibery and it's like the strings kind of like they pull but then they get stuck a little bit until you break the string, right? Like the strings separate and then they pull and pull and pull and then those little strings just snap, right? The little fibers. So the fibers get separated away from each other and then each of the little fibers snap. It's what it feels like, but it's your intestines. It's not celery. You feel the teeth latch into the intestinal wall, pull apart, and then there's a stringiness. There's like a tug and tug and tug and then snap. In the water. Water gushing into your abdomen. As that's happening, and you're tethered to this 10-foot python neck. Again, I know it's not a python, I'm calling it that. So that's what the neck feels like. Now you stare 10 feet out in front of you, the water. Slumping out of the water is this wet, shiny, glistening, greenish brown back. The torso that is 6 feet wide. The entire animal, because you're getting mauled by an animal, the entire animal is 40 feet long. And let me tell you, 40 feet looks longer than you think. It's already bad enough to see the neck, to feel the teeth, see the back, see the fat, wide, bulbous torso. Oh, fucking god damn it. And then the tether feeling pulls downward on your fucking neck. Throat? No, my throat's closing up. The tether feeling pulls downward on your intestine, and now it's even worse because you're under the water. You were at least above it before, right? Under the water. I've died in these experiences. Again, even if not literally, experientially, I've felt what it's like to die. This can happen anywhere from every other day to multiple times a day. How do I go about my day while doing it? Well, just like how I went about talking to you about that. I can get through it, but there's some effects while it's happening. Luckily, I don't always have to talk as I'm going about my day because my throat would keep closing up. I'm still here, right? You can hear my voice. Luckily I'm not bursting out into tears, which I certainly would be if I wasn't such a blissful, calm person. It's the only thing keeping me from breaking down. That would be a very human response to be gushing in tears right now. The only reason I'm not is because of the other stuff. It's the only way I even can have some sort of calmness. And even then, still, there's the throat closing. I had to keep pausing. Struggle to get through it. All those shortcomings. And when I say, that there's these experiences, feeling what it's like to die, I'm not talking about near-death experiences. I've had those too. Out-of-body experiences. I've had a lot of out-of-body experiences. So I'm not talking about that. There's no out-of-body experiences here. You just die. Black. It just goes black. And then the experience is done. You just fade, and then you're done. And you go about your day. And so, post-trauma response of the kind that I've been diagnosed with from this, because I've talked about this with psychologists. They're like, well, it's not schizophrenia because you've had experiences, not like this specific one, but experiences with things that aren't there, or at least aren't visibly there. You've had these throughout your whole life. Schizophrenia, yeah, there's some exceptional cases, but even the exceptional cases will start as early as being like a teenager, like 13 to 16 years old. Most cases start when you're around my age, like early to mid to late 20s. So if you've had experiences your whole life, well, that's not typical of schizophrenia. And then also, you are able to distinguish some sort of quality whereby it's different from the other experiences going on around you. So I can tell that the plesiosaur is different than this computer that I'm using to record this on. That this computer is here in an empirical sense, and that the plesiosaur isn't. Right? Schizophrenics usually cannot tell the difference. They usually cannot tell what is observationally there from what isn't. Somehow I'm able to distinguish that. And so that was another reason. They called it intact reality testing. They said you have intact reality testing. You're able to still tell what is there from what isn't. Or at least what is there in a typical sense from what isn't there in a typical sense. So, like, obviously we cannot scientifically test whether these experiences are real. It's not like we have some sort of time machine or whatever, right? So yeah, like you're saying, there's no reason to believe they're real. We have no way to tell whether they're real or not. So all we can say is that you're experiencing them. That's it. We cannot say you're schizophrenic. We cannot say the experiences are real either. You're just, for some reason, experiencing stuff that people don't. We don't know why. We don't have a diagnosis for why. The only diagnosis we can give is the post-trauma response, which, again, that's not a specific diagnosis. That's a general kind of umbrella category. PTSD is in there. The closest kind of post-trauma response that I have to PTSD or have had to PTSD is there's this book of like fictional mythological monsters that I got at a bookstore when I was a kid. And there's a section on all sorts of different monsters, Bigfoot, dragons, Loch Ness Monster. A couple years ago, so I was, how old would I have been? Well, somewhere in my 20s, I don't know. I opened up that book, coincidentally right to the page where there's an entire plesiosaur sprawled out, right? You think like the Loch Ness Monster. I don't even like saying that word anymore. Loch Ness Monster. Opened up the book, saw the entire body sprawled out. It's sprawled out across both pages. I can't even look at the shape of the body without it triggering a response. I opened it up, and the response was my wrists shot up, like, to my head, like, kind of to both sides of my forehead. My wrists shot up, almost kind of like you're guarding yourself in boxing, like you hold your forearms up to kind of block them. My wrists shot up like that instantly, and my whole body started tremoring, and I fell to the floor in almost like a fetal position. I didn't stay in the fetal position. I just mean, like, I collapsed into that, and then I was like, wait, what the fuck just happened? And it was involuntary. That's something that people don't understand about post-trauma responses or PTSD specifically, is it's not voluntary. It's not just some sort of psychological thing where, like, you feel it coming on and then you have a choice to stop it. No, it's like throwing up. Like, do you choose to throw up? No, you vomit, right? Like, it just happens involuntarily. That's what this was. This was a physical, involuntary trigger. I didn't throw up. I'm just using the example of throwing up because it's similar, right? You just throw up. This was literally just like that. Wrists shoot up, body tremors, collapse to the floor. As soon as I saw the shape of the body, I can't even look at the shape of the body without getting a response. It's not always that response. I don't always tremor and collapse. But in the couple instances where I have, yeah, it's completely involuntary. There's no mental agency going on there. It's like it happens before you even realize it happened. I literally was sitting on the floor. I was like, why the hell did I just collapse like that? It was weird. It was just like, it's like if somebody like just throws a punch at you, right? Like it happens and then you're laying there. I've never been punched, but I imagine that's how it would feel, right? Somebody throws a punch, you're on the floor, you're like, where the fuck did that come from? That's what it was. I sat there on the floor. I was like, wait, what? How did my body tremor like that? How did my wrist shoot up so fast? So yeah, I told a couple of my psychologists about that. They're like, yep, that's a post-trauma response. They're like, since it's not causing, like, since it's not deteriorating your life consistently, I mean, like, somehow you have a way of handling it. I mean, yeah, you struggle to get through it, obviously. It's not like it's not hard. You obviously can see that as I was trying to talk about that. So yeah, it's hard, but the fact that you're able to kind of push through it and maintain some sort of order or calmness in your life, cannot say it's specifically a post-trauma stress disorder, right? So we cannot specifically say it's PTSD, but it's a post-trauma response. At least that was, kind of the opinion I got from those couple psychologists. Obviously, psychologists can have different opinions, so maybe there's other psychologists listening to this who would have a different opinion. I don't know, but that's just what I got from a couple of them. It's not just that my throat closes up, it's my ears tremor. Like the insides of my ears, they measurably flutter. And you might think, oh, like from the experience of going underwater? Like, no, it doesn't just happen going underwater, because I get it with the T-Rexes too, which I'll talk about in a minute. No, it's just for some reason, I don't know why, when your body kind of like that, yeah, like some sort of fluttering happens in the ear. I don't know why, but I can tell it's actually fluttering. It's there like how the computer is here. It's not there like how the plesiosaur is there. It's there like how the computer is. Like, I'm convinced you could actually put something in my ear and watch it flutter. Whatever part of my ear or ears are fluttering, it feels like it's somewhere in, I don't know if it'd be the ear canal, the middle ear, the inner ear, I don't know where, but something in there is fluttering. I don't know why. Now, the fluttering, the physical fluttering, even if it's measurable, that does not prove that the experiences are real. You might think that, well, Ethan, if your ear is physically, measurably fluttering, doesn't that prove that they're real? Not necessarily, because maybe if you have an intense experience like that, right? I mean, the throat closing, that's physical. So maybe the ear fluttering happens just like throat closing. It doesn't mean that the experience is literally real. An experience alone is enough to trigger those kinds of physical closings or flutterings. So that could be all it is. So I've been mauled to death by plesiosaurs. At least had the experience on multiple occasions. With the T-Rexes now up to fairly recently, I used to always tell people, yeah, I've never been mauled by one. Oh, that changed. Fairly recently, I did get a couple of those. It was never like experiencing death, though, not like with the plesiosaur. It's just like getting your arm bitten off. I've had that also with the plesiosaurs, getting your arm bit off. Fucking goddamn it. Like swims by and just snaps bites at your forearm, the upper forearm. God, that hurts though. It's obviously not as bad as getting your arm literally bitten off, but there's some pain there. Sinks in, just rips it off as it swims by, just glides through the water. Upper forearm right beneath the elbow. So you're talking right beneath the joint, just snap it off. Anyways, point being, yeah, I've gotten that with the plesiosaur, but I've also had that with the T-Rex. No exaggeration, the T-Rex. So first of all, how big? Again, even if these aren't real experiences, the sizes I've seen are accurate. at least what we have fossil evidence of. Because plesiosaurs were said to be about 40 plus feet. 45, 46 feet. Yeah. With the T-Rex, the same thing. Pretty accurate to size. How high at the hip? 12 feet. Again, that might not sound like much, but I have a ceiling in my living room here in my apartment. It's one of those kind of tent-shaped ceilings where it's not a flat ceiling. It's like triangular, you know? You might have a living room like that yourself, but it kind of like points upwards. I've measured the height of the ceiling at the peak. The peak is 10 feet. I'm not just talking about the sides, right? Like the sides, the walls of the living room. Like those are about 8 feet, maybe not even. The peak, I've measured the peak. 10 feet. Because there's a doorway right under the peak. The doorway is 6'9" in metric. I know I have a lot of European people in my audience. So metric, that would be like 205.5 or 206 centimeters, somewhere around there, right? So a few centimeters over 2 meters, right? 6'9". And then above that, 3'3". So yeah, 6'9" plus 3 foot is 9'9" plus another 3 inches, 10 feet. 10 feet is slightly over 3 meters. It's about like 303 centimeters, I believe. It's slightly over 3 meters. 12 feet would be, I think, about 363 centimeters. That's how high T-Rex is or was at the hip. 363 centimeters, or whatever 12 feet is in centimeters. 2 feet above that ceiling. If you just like look at that ceiling, like the peak, you're like, man, that's a high ceiling. It's only 10 feet. 10 feet looks higher than you think it does. 12 feet is fucking massive. I think most people would see something that is 12 feet tall and immediately go, that's 20 feet. No joke. I think you would look at something 12 feet tall in the flesh. Like if you see something that big, you're going to go 20 feet. No, it ain't 20 feet, but it looks 20 feet. Massive. Like if you just saw like a 10-foot tall human walking through a forest like that, you would look at that and think that's a dinosaur. Like 10 feet is massive enough with the head and the arms and the legs and the torso and everything scaled up proportionally. A 10-foot tall person walking through a forest, snapping twigs, that would look like a dinosaur. But then you see an actual dinosaur 12 foot high at the hip. That's something else. I mean, you see the bones and stuff at museums. Let me tell you, nothing like seeing a tangible one walking, breathing. Nothing like that at all. Over 40 feet long. I swear I've seen a couple that I swear were 50 feet long. I tend to be pretty good at estimating size. I tend to guess people's heights and the lengths of stuff pretty accurately. I tend to be pretty good at just eyeballing and intuitively guessing the sizes of things. So that's the only reason I can kind of trust it a little bit. And also I can compare it to objects, right? Like I kind of did with the hip height and the height of my ceiling. I can do that. Be like, yeah, okay, what I saw is about 12 feet. So you put both those together, you get an answer. I swear I've seen some that are 50 feet long. I think the biggest T-Rex fossils we've ever found are 43 feet long. So again, I don't know if any of this is real. Maybe there were some giant, I mean, there's huge humans, right? There's 7-foot tall humans. It's reasonable to think there were maybe some 50-foot long T-Rexes. I swear I've seen a couple that were 50 feet long. Whether or not there ever actually was such a thing on this planet. But even the 40-foot plus ones, I mean, no exaggeration, the size of a small barn. That's how it looks. You're looking at an animal, we're just eyeballing it, it's like, that looks like a small barn. It's a big animal. Anyways, why am I bringing up some of these experiences? The point is that these experiences feel very real. They have very real effects on me. And they're even very accurate, at least in some ways. Like I said, the sizes are accurate. A lot of things about the looks are accurate. Another thing, the T-Rexes, people will ask, well, did they look more bird-like? Did they look more reptilian, right? Like bird-like, so avian is, I think that's the term for it. I don't know if avian can refer to flightless birds. Maybe it does. I'll just use the term because I don't want to keep saying bird-like. I'll be lazy and say avian. People have this question of, did T-Rexes look more avian or did they look more reptilian, like in Jurassic Park? I have seen a full spectrum. So the best way I characterize it is like look at the entire population of all the different ethnicities of human beings. You know how like some people look more robust, like they have a wider nose, a more prominent brow line, like they just look more robust. So like for example, racists would say, oh, they look more ape-like, but they usually use it to refer to black people. It's not just black people though. You have like a lot of people in Russia and Eastern Europe, completely white, and they just have that prominent look, right? Like the wide nose and the prominent eyebrows. So like, you know, when racists say, oh, they look more ape-like, they use it to refer to black people. There's like people of all skin colors who have the kind of robustness I'm talking about, but they have that kind of look where it's like, okay, yeah, I guess if you want to be like kind of rude about it, you could say there's people who look more quote-unquote ape-like. Not just Russian people. There's the Aboriginals in Australia, or Aborigines. They kind of have that look too. And they're not black. People think they're black. They're actually more closely related to East Asian peoples than they are to African peoples. They have darker skin. That's it. Interesting little trivia fact there for you. Yeah, they're more closely related to East Asians. So yeah, you have East Asian types, African types, white, Caucasian, Siberian, Russian, Eastern European types. All skin colors can sport the kind of look that I'm talking about, where they look quote-unquote more ape-like. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where people have a more narrow nose, they have more kind of straightened, refined features, not as curvy of facial features, right? A little bit sharper looking, a little bit more angular. And that's what people typically think of as the European look. But again, it's the same thing, like racists think, oh, it's black people that have the robust look. No, all sorts of people. Same thing with the look I'm talking about. People stereotypically characterize that as like the European look, but there's lots of different ethnicities of different colors that have the more refined look that looks more quote-unquote human-like. So you have the spectrum going from what people would call quote-unquote human-like to quote-unquote ape-like. I've seen the exact same kind of spectrum in my T-Rex experiences going from avian to reptilian. So I've seen some that look very reptilian, like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. Very rough, scaly reptilian hide. And then over on the other end, I've seen some that just look like first glance out of the corner of your eye, you think it's a giant bird, and then you look at it, you're like, oh shit, that is not a bird. That thing has teeth. That thing has some pretty big scales under those feathers, right? Whole body covered in colorful feathers. But just piercing eyes, sharp teeth. And I've also seen everything in between, not just the more avian look and not just the more reptilian look, but in between. So like picture one that looks reptilian, but it has an entire mane of dark feathers wrapped around its neck. Almost like a lion, but feathers instead of fur. I've seen that. Or I've also seen ones that look really reptilian except for like a little tuft of feathers on the top of their head. Not even just bird-like feathers, like just the hairy, kind of fuzzy, stringy feathers, like what you see on a baby bird, right? Like it's not like, it doesn't look like a leaf. You know how a lot of feathers, like on chickens and stuff, they look like leaves, they kind of branch out. Not like that, like just a little tuft of like fuzzy hair on the top of their head. I've seen that. matted over. Also, can get kind of wet or sweaty. That can look pretty intimidating. So I talk about some of that stuff with people, and they're like, that sounds like it could be accurate. They're like, that sounds like, hey, maybe if we find more T-Rex fossils, we'll kind of like discover what you're saying to be true, right? I mean, it would make sense. Human beings have all sorts of different phenotypes, call them different ethnicities, right? Wouldn't it make sense that T-Rexes had that too? So my point is that these experiences feel very real. There seems to be a lot of accuracy in them, and there's a lot of things in them which could even be taken as potential scientific predictions. Like, hey, maybe we find more fossils and like we'll prove like what you're saying to be true. And yet, despite all of that, it still does not mean that what I'm experiencing is real. So you kind of have to see how high the standards need to be. That's kind of what I was hinting at earlier with the flat earth example too. Your standards need to be really high. Most people's standards are, as soon as something makes logical sense, boom, that's got to be true. And voila, you get a lot of people in the flat earth community. If not flat earth, something else. Almost everybody has something. Everybody's got their poison, right? Everybody's got something where maybe to other people it's like, why the hell are you believing in that wacky shit? But to you it's like, hey, I heard about it, made logical sense, I had an experience with it, good to go. It's got to be real, right? How could it not be real? Your standards have to be higher. If I can have these very tangible experiences with all this stuff around it, pointing signs at it like signposts, say maybe that's accurate, maybe that's real, maybe that's a scientific prediction, and I can come out like, hey, yeah, I don't think that's real, I don't believe that's real. If I can do that, I think that showcases a level of human potential where we can all be a little bit less clingy with our own selves and our own beliefs. I think we can power through that. Don't you? It's not even just those. Like I said, I've got some other experiences I can talk about. I might even do another part to this recording. This is already getting longer than I expected. Because the main point that I wanted to bring up with this video, talking about the logic and how it can be false despite being perfectly clean and uncontradictory, and bringing up tangible experiences, the whole point that I want to bring up here is I think people need to learn how to think. Which is a cliche you hear a lot. It's so cliche, it's like, there's probably bumper stickers out there, like a bumper sticker term. People need to learn how to think, not be told what to think. It's so cliche, but I don't think people really see what that entails. I think people think of themselves as, oh yeah, I see how to think, but then they're just really good at being logical, or they just have a lot of experiences of their own, and they're like, well, I experienced it for myself, therefore I can't possibly be dogmatic. Experiencing stuff for yourself is not good enough. Having clean logical consistency is not good enough. And we need to see why it's not good enough. And that's kind of the point that I want to bring up here. Why is it not good enough? So before I get on to some of the other experiences and then go off into the next part of this recording, I want to bring up an example that I think is a good example of what is enough. Since we were just talking about dinosaurs, I'll bring up an example along those lines. The impact theory about the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, marine reptiles, and so much of the life that existed on the planet back then, people kind of look at that and think, oh, that's just a theory. We don't really know what it was that killed the dinosaurs. Now, disclaimer here, of course, I talked about this in my last recording. We could always entertain some sort of metaphysical model like last Thursdayism, where the past didn't really happen, and it's all just lingering traces that look like some past that happened. But again, like I said in that last recording, that just changes the nature of what the past is. So instead of being some literal chronological stretch of events that were literally experienced, we would just say, well, the past is it's a toolbox of effects, right? All these effects are here and this and that. So regardless of what the past is, regardless of what dinosaurs were, we're going to speak about dinosaurs and this asteroid, right? Regardless of the metaphysics. Now, I'm not saying that there's no difference. Obviously, there's a huge difference between the past having actually happened versus the past being a toolbox of effects. So I'm not saying there's no difference. I'm just saying there's statements we can make which are true independently of whichever one of those metaphysical models is correct. You see what I'm saying? Right? Like, regardless of the vast difference between last Thursdayism versus the past actually happened, regardless of those huge differences, there's statements which are broad enough and true enough to be there and be present in either case. So whichever case we're in, the facts are going to be there. So when we say an asteroid killed the dinosaurs, okay, whether that literally happened or not, whatever metaphysics we're doing or not doing, we're talking about some sort of effect. It was either an effect that was literally experienced by literal dinosaurs on a literal planet. All of that was literally effective, or it's, a lingering residual series of traces. And that's it. But whatever it is, people look at that theory and go, yeah, no, it was something else. Some sort of other effect or lingering trace that was responsible. Well, let's look at what we have. There's a crater, Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. I believe it's 6 miles in diameter. I don't remember the exact number. I think that's right, but you can always fact check me on that. 6 miles in diameter. So, okay, we've got some math. You can look at a 6-mile crater and use math to get some sort of approximate estimate for how large the thing was that filled the crater. So you don't just get a diameter, you get a whole 3-dimensional approximation of how large this thing actually was. Okay, great. But in order to get some sort of actual weight or mass, to go with that estimated volume, you need to know what the thing was made of. We found throughout that crater all sorts of iridium deposits and other types of substances and chemical deposits. So we can discern that this thing was made of iridium and some percentage, right? We can get some sort of mixture, right? Like, okay, well, we find this percentage of iridium in there and this percentage of all sorts of other stuff. So using the percentage, you use the math and say, okay, well, we have this volume now, right? This volume that fills out this 6-mile diameter. We've got the volume. Now, in order to figure out the mass of that volume, we just plug in that percentage of mixtures of chemicals like iridium and all sorts of other stuff. And so, what was it? It was a giant rock. A meteorite or an asteroid. I realize I'm not the best science communicator because meteorite, asteroid, parabola, asymptote. Yeah, there's differences. I just suck at, stuff. I am not a scientist, but do my best to communicate it. And then you can fill in the details later by going and actually listening to actual scientific sources. But point here being, that it was a giant rock that filled this crater. And not only that, we find other materials like shock quartz, which has distinct parallel lines which can only be formed from a high velocity impact. So it's not like all this iridium and all these materials were just belched out of a super volcano. No, the crater shows these very distinct parallel lines in this shock quartz. Shock quartz forms at not only high heat or in high heat conditions, but very high velocity impact conditions. So we can discern, okay, it was a high velocity impact event which caused a lot of heat, right? High impact can cause high heat because there's so much energy that gets generated from that high velocity. And shock quartz only gets created from that, at least on the Earth, right? I mean, we don't find any cases where shock quartz gets created elsewhere. And also, given the nature of these parallel lines and their distribution, you can do more math. You can figure out how high the velocity was, meaning you can figure out how fast this giant rock was moving. It was moving so fast that there's no way this thing could have just come from some part of the Earth. For something to gain that much speed and accelerate that much, it had to have come from a large enough distance. I mean, you're not going to get it just from sailing through the atmosphere or somewhere around the planet. How the hell would it even circularly go around the planet without being in orbit anyways? But you get my point. It's a large enough distance. It's got to come from outer space. And not only that, iridium is not found very much on Earth. It's a very rare substance on Earth, right? So we look at this iridium deposit, which, by the way, was not just in the crater. We found it all around the planet. I'll get to that here in a few minutes. But all around, actually, no, I'll get to some part of it now. You look at the entire layer, like all the layers, geological layers of our geological history. You see no iridium, no iridium, no iridium, no iridium. All of a sudden, a huge burst of iridium, and then nothing after that. It's like iridium appeared, and then it just got buried. It got buried underneath. Like the Earth just like went back to its normal geologic deposits. So like we have normal geological deposits, and by normal I mean like all the stuff that would get created by super volcanoes or regular volcanoes or just general geological processes, right? Like we see all that normal stuff, then all of a sudden there's iridium, and then it just gets buried by the later processes. The geological processes just go back to normal, and they bury that layer of iridium, and we never see it burst again. So there's no iridium, no iridium, no iridium, no iridium for millions and billions of years. A ton of fucking iridium. No iridium, no iridium, no iridium, no iridium. It just piles on top of the iridium, and now you just have that distinct iridium layer, entirely distinct from all the layers below it and the later layers above it that buried it. Like the Earth didn't just suddenly produce all of that iridium. Where do we find a ton of iridium? We find it in meteorites or asteroids. Again, I'm not super precise with my terms. You get what I mean? We find it in outer space from those types of objects. And also, the composition of this rock, it wasn't just iridium, it was a specific mixture where we could match it up perfectly to meteorites or asteroids that lie beyond the orbit of Jupiter. So it wasn't just like, oh, this is a rock which has a signature composition of the asteroid belt. Like, no, we know of entire groups of rocks, giant space rocks in our solar system, which have the exact composition that we found in this deposit laying in this crater and all over the planet. So you've got composition there matching up to rocks in outer space, and there's shock quartz mathematically showing a high impact event, and there's this distinct iridium layer where there's no layers like it beneath it, and then there's no layers like it above it. So the Earth isn't just producing this through mere geological processes. This has to come from somewhere else. And look, we find rocks that look exactly like its composition, and the high velocity, we can calculate how fast this thing came in and where it came from. You can use all that math to figure it out. I've said this before. Two items next to two items is four items. There's a lot of stuff you can figure out with math. So long as we're not getting lost in just mathematical consistency alone, like the flat earth example, right? Because how is this different than the flat earth example? There's tons of signs pointing to it. With the flat earth example, yeah, we have mathematical consistency, but that's like all we have. You start now, for example, even in ancient times, in ancient Greece, what was that guy's name? Eratosthenes? I hope I pronounced that correctly. Eratosthenes. There were ancient Greeks like him who could just travel a certain distance, measure the curvature between those distances, and to a very accurate degree, especially considering that the fact that they lived like over 2,000 years ago, they very accurately calculated the circumference of the earth, where it's like now over 2,000 years later we like have affirmed their calculations physically from space. Like we can see the circumference they were talking about with our own eyes, and like, yep, they were correct. I mean, they were a little bit off, but hey, they were approximating stuff, but they were like very largely accurate. So even without being able to go to space, there's signs that we can look at which point to a globe Earth, and therefore point to the fact that, hey man, it's not just asymptotes and parabolas and refraction and shit. There's actually a horizon. And there's all sorts of other signs that our planet is traveling through space. Therefore, it's got to be in an orbit, and the sun, like there's all these different mechanisms. I'm not even listing them all of them together in unison, like a choir, sing a song, and that song points to one conclusion. The Earth is a globe, it's orbiting a star. That star appears to vanish over a horizon. This is the thing. Like I said, there's almost like four quadrants we can get here. There's direct experiences which prove something, or at least are true, even if they themselves don't prove something. Then direct experiences can also be false, right? You can directly experience something that still doesn't make it true. But then there's two other quadrants. There's stuff which is not directly experienced, and therefore it's like, okay, why would you believe that? It's most likely not even true. You haven't even seen it for yourself. But there's another quadrant that most people have not considered, which is that even if you cannot directly experience something, you can get so many different signposts and so many different puzzle pieces within your experience that all those puzzle pieces point to something that is unavoidably true, even if it's so vast that your experience has not been able to encompass it yet. So it's like it's tangential with direct experience, but it's so broad and so vast that like your direct experience alone cannot swallow it. But that's fine because there's all these signposts in your direct experience which together point to that vast thing. They can all kind of shout to it like a choir. So direct experience does not automatically make something true. It can. Likewise, lack thereof does not automatically make something false. But it can. That's why I speak the way I do about my dinosaur experiences. Yeah, they're very tangible experiences, but how many signposts are there? I mean, I guess there's a few, right? Like the size accuracy and the looks and the phenotypes and the effects it has on me. But here's the thing. Having a few signposts is not enough. People typically think that in order for something to qualify as evidence, all it has to do is have a positive number of signposts. No, that's not enough. People think, okay, well, lack of evidence just means you either have a neutral or a negative number of signposts. Neutral would mean zero, right? So if you have a neutral number of signposts, you have zero signposts. There's like no signs pointing to the truth of what you're saying, therefore there's no reason to believe it's true. Or you could have a negative number of signposts, which means not only do we not have any signposts pointing to what you're saying being true, we actually have signposts pointing away from it. Either pointing to the fact that it isn't true, or at least pointing to some other fact that is more likely to be true. That's what it means to have a negative number of signposts. And yeah, having a neutral or negative number of signposts, that's bad news, right? But most people don't understand this. Even having a positive number of signposts can still be bad news, because it's not enough to just have a few of them. You've got to have a whole mountain of them. A whole mountain. I have not even gone through the whole list. I can keep going with this asteroid impact. I've already talked about the crater, the diameter, math. We use math to calculate the size. We use the iridium in the composition to calculate how massive this thing was. We find shock quartz. We look at the distinct parallel lines of that shock quartz to figure out the velocity of this thing. And by the way, on that note, it wouldn't even just be that the whole rock filled the entire crater. Obviously, from the math, you can see a lot of that space in that crater could be created just from the velocity, right? You can calculate the size and the velocity and all that from the crater, from the shock quartz, from the parallel lining, the composition, how far away it had to come from in space. But there's still more. There's a lot more. For example, now that we have this sort of image in our heads, or I should say once the scientists kind of do all the math and figure out this image in their heads of, okay, the rock was this large, it was made of this, therefore this is how much mass it had, this is the speed it was traveling at, this is how far away it traveled from. Now you can sort of play it back like a simulation. You can play back, okay, given a rock of this size and this mass traveling at this speed hitting this part of the Earth, what sorts of effects would we expect to see on the Earth? And there's a lot. One of them is that the iridium from this giant asteroid would not just get deposited into the crater, it would actually get spit up into the atmosphere, and eventually over years and years it would form a layer throughout the whole globe, the whole atmosphere around the whole globe, and eventually it'll get rained down as ash or dust or whatever. It'll get deposited across the surface of the whole planet, is what I'm saying. You can figure that out with the math. It's not just like a model of mathematical consistency like flat Earth. Like, no, you're plugging in real physics, real signposts for how this would actually work. You're not just making up some sort of mathematically consistent asymptotes. This is how stuff physically, empirically works. You're taking that and then you're plugging that into the math. So it's not just empty math, right? The flat Earth model was just empty math where the slots in the equations are not being filled. In this case, the slots are being filled by actual physical mechanisms that we can observe and test, and we see that they work how they work over and over and over again. So you are plugging stuff in. You're filling up the equation and bringing it alive, where now it is physically unavoidable. It's not just empty math where it's just pure mathematical consistency and that's it. It has something extra. It has something extra. And so we can tell from the math and plugging in all those physical forces and objects, look, it's going to get deposited around the planet. That is just an unavoidable physical fact of our physical world. It's just how our physical world operates. Regardless of whether or not there's other worlds with other laws of physics, the laws of physics work how they work here. And here, the laws of physics say this is going to be unavoidable. It's going to get deposited around the whole planet. And guess what? We have found that exact composition deposited across the whole planet. Like I said, no iridium, no iridium, no iridium, a ton of iridium, no iridium, no iridium, no iridium. The entire planet shows it. And also, here's more. We can keep going. You can even discern this in your head. If there's some sort of impact, wouldn't it make sense? Like I said, making sense alone means nothing. You got to have more on top of it, but let's just use that as a starting point. Wouldn't it make sense that if there's this impact, the areas of the Earth that are closer to the impact are going to be more heavily affected than the regions of the Earth that are further away? Yeah. Okay, so guess what? You can plug in your math again, figure out, okay, there's a rock of this size traveling at this speed. What's going to happen if that thing hits the Earth? It's going to be like a bullet getting shot at a metal globe, right? The whole thing's going to vibrate. The vibrations are going to travel through the Earth. It's going to take like 20 minutes to travel through to the other side. because the Earth is so massive, right? It's going to take a while for those shock waves to travel through. But either way, we should expect to see earthquakes approximately around the same time. I mean, they're still going to happen on the same day as this impact. Guess what? We find evidence of all sorts of tsunamis. But not just that. For a certain radius around the asteroid impact, there's not just going to be tsunamis, things are going to be completely incinerated. The analogy I've heard before is if it were to happen today, like if there were a rock of the same type and the same size that struck the same exact peninsula in the same exact area today, if you lived in Texas, you would just get incinerated. If you lived in Chicago, your windows would get blown out. And if you lived in New York, you might get your eardrums blown out, or you would at least hear like a deafening sound. You would get some eardrum damage. So we can calculate, again, with the math, unavoidably plugging in these slots for the equations, unavoidably it's going to be the case. There's going to be incineration, and that it's not just going to be incineration to a certain extent and then it abruptly stops. Obviously, it's going to blend like colors of a spectrum. There's going to be incineration and then a little bit less radical of incineration and then a little bit less, right? So like if you're in Texas, you're going to get incinerated to some degree. If you're in Chicago, you're not going to get incinerated at all, but your windows would get blown out. And then if you're in New York, you're not even going to have any degree of that. You're just going to get some eardrum damage, which is obviously still bad, but it's not anything like what's closer to the other areas. So we can calculate that and go, okay, so modern day Chicago, we should expect to see, for example, trees taking the same damage that a window would take getting blown out. Guess what we find? We find that type of damage. We find, there was like, for example, a site in North Dakota, they found like sea turtles getting impaled into trees. Not just getting impaled into trees, because obviously that's not going to happen much. It's hard to throw a sea turtle so precisely that it literally gets impaled like a bullseye on a branch. So it's not just impaling. We find like sea turtles getting smashed into trees. So much that the traces of their seashells and their skin and their flesh gets enmeshed into the tree bark. Like there's these tsunamis. I mean, sea turtles live in the sea. How the fuck are they getting enmeshed into trees that are on land? Tsunamis, right? It's not just sea turtles, it's fish. We find fish getting enmeshed into trees. How are they getting thrown out of the sea into fucking trees? Fish don't climb trees. It's because we can calculate, given how far away the impact was, what would happen. We can find very precisely it would have enough force to do exactly what we're seeing. Fish getting thrown that far. So the math is a signpost that points to it. The tsunamis, the earthquakes, the fish in the trees, the sea turtles in the trees, all signposts pointing to it. Closer to the crater, like the Texas incineration example I gave, we actually find like just a fucking mush of debris and organisms and tissue, like DNA, well, not DNA, that doesn't last, but all sorts of stuff just thrown together. It's like, it's not even distinguishable. Just like remains of animals tossed in with ash, tossed in with rock, like everything just tossed together and blended together, just perfectly incinerated, exactly as the math would tell you. I'm still not done. Like, and mind you, each of these points that I've brought up, the shock quartz, the parallel lines, the high velocity, the iridium composition, the asteroid composition, the deposit around the whole planet, each of these traits and signposts alone in of themselves has a whole other list of sub-signposts, because there are signposts pointing to the composition of the asteroids and the iridium I talked about. There's sub-signposts pointing to the high velocity and the parallel lines and the forming of shock quartz and high velocity heat impacts, right? Like each of these signposts, there's already so many signposts, and each of these signposts has a whole list of sub-signposts. So when the general public points at this and says, oh, we don't actually know what killed the dinosaurs, we don't know it was actually an asteroid, you're a fucking idiot. That would be like going to court, having a crime scene where there's this, like, we found a file on this dude's computer, and I'm gonna go kill Sammy Jones because he's been mean to me at my work, right? We find that document saved on his computer. Obviously, I'm coming up with a very kind of blatant example here. They're not always this obvious, but that's my point. It would be this obvious. It would be like if there was a crime scene that was so obvious that this guy like wrote up a document. Oh, Sammy Jones, he's been being mean to me at work. I don't want him to be the boss anymore. I know his son will replace him. And then you go to the people at work. They're like, yeah, okay, he has been being a little bit mean to the guy. Like all the people at the workplace are reporting that. They're reporting what's being said in this file. The guy has it written in his file. And then there's like certain types of shoes that the guy has, which leave a distinct kind of footprint. Like they're these special custom made shoes that he has. And you find blood footprints throughout the house of Sammy Jones that only match his custom shoes. And then there's a knife that you find the receipts for the knife, and the guy, literally this guy who wrote the note about wanting to kill Sammy, like bought this knife at Walmart, and like Sammy's dead, it's his blood on the knife, and like holy shit. Like you're telling me you had to be there to say for sure that this dude was the murderer? You're a fucking idiot. Like, he did it. Again, that's what I'm saying. We can find things in direct experience. Look, I'm directly experiencing the blood footprints. I'm directly experiencing the blood on the knife, right? Like, all the investigators have these things. They have these clues. They have these signposts within their direct experience, which together in unison can sing like a choir. Look, that guy's the murderer. Yeah, you weren't around to experience it, so I guess technically there's like a 0.00000000001% chance that he didn't do it. But we've got documents, we've got receipts, we've got blood, we've got shoes, we got knives, we got people at work telling a story around it. That's like all pointing in unison. He did it. You're telling me you're not going to say that guy did it? We need higher standards. Again, this is what I don't like, is that we aren't being taught how to think. Everybody just wants to be a contrarian. Oh, I don't believe in the theory that the asteroid killed the dinosaurs because that's just a bunch of scientists lying to us. The global elite, they're just all lying to us. I don't care who says it. I don't care whether the truth comes from you and your own direct experience or whether it comes from a collective of scientists who belong to the quote-unquote establishment. I don't care if it comes from an anti-establishment group. The truth is the truth. I don't care if it comes from within yourself. I don't care if it comes from without, from another person or authority. This is another thing that I hate seeing in the comments section of all these cult videos that I talk about, is people will say, God, this just shows that we really need to go back to being our own gurus. No, no, that is not the answer. You're fallible too. You get things wrong too, right? Do you really think like, oh, you're just going to turn inward and everything's going to be perfect? You can get things wrong too. It's not just about don't believe others, don't even believe yourself. Right? There's this sort of approach that I find a lot, especially in spirituality, like under those cult documentaries, where I call it the manyness approach versus the oneness approach. So the manyness approach is like you listen to authority figures, they tell you the truth, they tell you about science, they tell you all these scientific facts, and that's like you're looking outside yourself for the truth. That's the manyness approach. And a lot of spiritual people will say that's bad. That's a bad thing to do. The thing you should be doing is turning within, directly experiencing things for yourself, finding the truth for yourself. And I call that the oneness approach, because you're just relying on yourself, right? There's only one thing you're relying on, just yourself. You're not looking outside yourself at all these many authority figures relying on the manyness approach. You're just taking the oneness approach. The oneness approach is just as bad. What we need is a zero-ness approach. Not a manyness approach, not a oneness approach, a zero-ness approach. Don't rely on authority figures outside of yourself, and also don't even rely on yourself. Don't even rely on yourself. Okay, so who do you rely on? That's the beauty of the zeroness approach, is it's actually flexible. It goes so far inwards that it's not even inwards anymore. It's like this flexible fluid spectrum where it can shapeshift. It's like a shapeshifter. It basically just says have no standards. Have zero standards for wherever the truth comes from, whether it comes from the many or whether it comes from the one. Do not have any standards. Do not have any preconceived notions. Have zero of them. Whether the truth comes from yourself, or whether the truth comes from an outside figure, or whether the truth comes from some other weird option that has not been listed here, the truth is the truth. And the truth is unavoidable, which is why it is important to have so many signposts pointing at it. That is what unavoidability looks like. Truth is unavoidable. It will have so many signposts pointing at it that they will be unavoidable, and they will all unavoidably point to the same unavoidable thing. Now, whether that unavoidable thing is found within your experience or whether it's not found within your experience does not matter. Have zero standards. It is not about being your own guru. It is not about listening to other gurus. It is not just about listening to teachers. It is also not about listening to yourself as your own teacher. The only teacher is they whom the truth speaks for. So when a scientist teaches you about the impact theory that I just spoke about, the truth of what they're teaching does not come from their own mouths. It comes from the fact that the universe itself speaks for them. Out there in the universe, there is a whole layer of iridium, a whole 6-mile diameter crater, a whole depositing of the iridium composition around the planet. There's shock quartz. Like, there's things outside of their words which speak for them. The truth does not come from their mouths. It comes from what is there, running alongside in parallel to the very thing coming out of their mouths. It's kind of like in those comic books, you know, like how sometimes there's those characters who will have some sort of like device or something floating next to them, or some sort of sidekick. What's the best example I can think of? What's his name? Atrocitus, that Red Lantern guy, like he has that cat floating next to him. Or like Orga, the Godzilla monster, had like that whole spaceship floating next to him. That's basically what you want. You want the universe floating next to you, speaking for you, as if you were its puppet. So yeah, the truth may be coming out of some teacher's mouth, but that's not what makes it true. Something is only true if that mouth is a mere puppet for the universe. The universe is like a foldable piece of paper for origami. You can fold it all sorts of ways. It can look all sorts of ways. You can fold it in the shape of a bird, in the shape of a tree. It's a little bit hard to do with origami, but a little bit off topic. Anyways, it can be shaped in all sorts of ways. Whether it comes in the shape of a teacher or a scientist like Albert Einstein, or whether it comes in the shape of yourself, it is the universe, it is what is real, and it is what is true. That shape-shifting piece of paper, of origami, that is the zeroness approach. Have no standards. Have no expectations. The paper can look any which way. Whichever way it looks is the truth. That is why I do not believe in my own dinosaur experiences. Yeah, there's some signposts, but like I said, a positive number of signposts is not enough, let alone a neutral or negative number of them. You have to have a mountain of them. Better yet, each of the individual signposts in that entire mountain, in of themselves, need entire mountains of sub-signposts. It could take you years, literally years, just to conceptually explore all the traits of the impact theory. I don't just mean having some sort of like direct experience of them. I mean just conceptually understanding them. It could take you years. There is so much. My dinosaur experiences do not have that many signposts. It'd be cool to say that I'm having real dinosaur experiences, and hell, maybe there's technically a possibility that I am, maybe, but I'm not going to be an agnostic about it. I'm not going to say, okay, therefore I think maybe it could be, maybe it couldn't be. No, I don't see any reason. They're real experiences in the sense of it having really been the case that I did experience them, and it's still really being the case that I do experience them, but that's not enough. It's not enough. I'm not just going to sit here and be my own guru. If it comes from within and it's a lie, it's still a lie. And I don't know whether or not it's a lie, but that means I'm certainly not going to take up a position. And so you remain neutral. You remain apistic. And so I guess that's why I finally decided to make another recording. I'm going to have another part to this because there's a lot I want to talk about. Also, if you haven't noticed, this is kind of like a hybrid recording. The last recording I did was a little bit more of like a personal one. This was kind of a hybrid mixture between personal experiences and personal feelings and actual like stuff that you can utilize in your own life. So like it's not just all about me. I'm not just like the central figure in this recording, whereas I was more so in the last one. So kind of doing like a hybrid one. Maybe I'll do more recordings where it's just back to pure stuff that does not have anything to do with me. Obviously, I've also done those in the past. I can keep doing those. It's just this was more of a hybrid, talking a little bit about myself personally, but then also sharing some stuff with you that is relevant to you, not just me. But see, the thing is, I don't know what to do. I had that last recording where I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know why I woke up in the middle of the night. I guess I have some desire to help people learn how to think, and I'm a little bit disheartened that it's not being done correctly. But see, that's where I have to look at myself and go, that's a pretty bold statement. When people are like, hey, I'm looking around and I don't see something being done correctly, I'm going to do it correctly. It's a pretty bold statement. And oftentimes when people are making a statement that bold about how they're going to do something correctly, whereas everybody else isn't doing it correctly, they can get blinded by their own delusions and their own narcissism, and they can think that they're correct when they're actually just as delusional and just as blind as everybody else around them. I have to be really careful about making sure that I'm not such a case, and the only thing I can even think to rely on in order to hold myself accountable are the signposts. That's the only thing I can think to do, is to take this zero-ness approach. Don't just speak from my own life experience. Don't just speak from the authority of others. Speak from the best we can find in the universe. Does the universe speak for it, as far as we can tell? If it does, then I think I can keep myself held as accountable as reasonably as I can, or at least I hope. But I still get worried, should I even try to pursue this? What would this even look like? Does this mean making more YouTube videos? I don't know. Does this mean debating other people? I've considered whether or not I should start doing debates. And at first I thought, well, that will be so, because you hear a lot, people are like, oh, debating is so useless, it's so low conscious, it's so rude, if you're debating others and debunking others, then you're not pursuing your own life purpose. And I hear that over and over and over again, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's true, I guess there's other better things to do than debating people. But then I turn around and I see those very same people criticizing other people. I talked about Peter Ralston earlier. He seems like, oh, don't don't debate or this or that, that's useless. Like, he refuses to interact with other people or try and like prove what he's saying correct. He just like is like, well, if you don't want to stick around and see if it works, then don't. Like, he refuses to debate people, and so he's one of those people where it's like, yeah, debating's low conscious, don't do that. But then he criticizes people too. Like, I look around, everybody's criticizing somebody. Everybody is criticizing somebody. Even the people who don't criticize people are criticizing somebody because they're like, oh, I'm just not going to get into it. I'm above that. I'm too good for that. Like, everybody's throwing punches. I guess, obviously I've done that here too, but that's my point, is like, do I just lean into that? Do I just start throwing punches? But how do you do that without becoming self-righteous? I guess my point is that there's all these different routes and paths I've thought about. Do I get into debating? Do I just do other stuff? Do I do more YouTube recordings after these? Like, and people will be like, well, yeah, debating's stupid, but like, is it? Debating isn't just standing up on a stage and formally arguing with somebody. As soon as you criticize somebody, that is already what debating is at its heart. You are presenting your own stuff and pushing back against someone else's stuff. That's what debating is. Just because you're not up on a stage doing it doesn't matter. You could be on a forum, on your own blog, writing stuff about how this is wrong, this is delusional, that's delusional, this is low conscious, that's low conscious. That's debating. You're not up on a stage debating somebody, you're not on a Zoom call debating somebody, you're not in a YouTube video digitally debating somebody, but you're still pushing back against somebody. You're still criticizing somebody. Is there such a thing as a person who truly criticizes nobody? I don't know that there is, and I don't know anymore as to whether or not it would even be healthy, even if there is such a thing. So do I do that? I don't know. Do I lean into that? Like I said, I'm already doing that too, but what I mean is, do I lean into that? Do I go with it explicitly? I don't know. And that's where this recording is still a little bit like my last recording. I don't quite know what I'm doing awake in the middle of the night. I guess I would like to teach people how to think, and yeah, that comes with some debating. How do I do that in the healthiest manner possible? How do I hold myself accountable? Like I said, the signposts help, but I want to really make sure I batten down the hatches. So that's something I'm going to keep thinking about, and there's still more experiences I want to go over. I just went over the dinosaur ones here. There's some of the psychic stuff I'm going to go over, as well as the more beautiful stuff as well. Like I said, I'm going to blend that. So there's still more recordings I'm going to do as later parts to this one. So I'm not done yet. My question is just after all that, what's my work going to look like? Am I going to do more YouTube videos? Am I just going to keep with my exclusive private stuff? I still don't quite know yet. This recording was a hybrid mixture between me personally trying to figure that out and think out loud, as well as offering you stuff that, like I said, is relevant to you rather than just me. So I'll continue on in the next part. I'll see you all then. Should I keep saying create a nice day? I don't know. I kind of stole that from a Dan Millman book, and I'm not really spiritual anymore, but, whatever. Create a nice day. Or actually, no, I'm going to leave you with a bonus part, because speaking of that laundry list of signposts and sub-signposts I talked about, I'll just finish this off with a little bit more of a tidbit trivia fact for you. There's a whole other section I was going to bring up about the dinosaur meteor thing that I didn't even completely forgot about. Got lost, drowned out by all the other things. That's how much there is. It's getting drowned out by all the other things. If you're my age or older, maybe Gen Z, or I'm early Gen Z, if you're that age or older, we all grew up in school hearing that the asteroid impact happened 65 million years ago. Okay, our geological measurements have gotten even more precise. We've gotten it down to 66,038,000 years ago. 66,038,000 years. So you've gotten it down to 1,000 years, which is tiny. That is super precise in geological terms. And despite how tiny that is and how zoomed in that is, guess what? The further and further and further we've zoomed in, consistently we have found all those signs matching up, happening at the same time. So yeah, technically you could say, well, maybe it was spread 1,000 years apart and the stuff didn't really happen at the same time. But the fact that we keep zooming in and in and in and in and in, and every step of the way it's showing the same time at every scale, that's a sign that, well, if you keep zooming in, right, don't just zoom into a range of time spanning 1,000 years, which again, that's already extremely tiny in geologic terms, but don't just zoom into 1,000 years, zoom into 100, then zoom into 10, then zoom into 1, then zoom into the same day. Like if you keep zooming in and in and in and in, all those signs are going to keep lining up, just as they already have as we keep zooming in and in and in and in, right? So we've gotten our measurements precise enough to be down to 1,000 years. 66,038,000 years ago. I think the Gen Alpha kids in school now are hearing that it's 66 million years ago rather than 65 for that reason, right? It's more precise now, more accurate to say 66, even though you could still technically say 65, and some people still do. 66 million years. And we find all the signposts happening on that same date of that same geological range of time. So yeah, it all lines up. Anyways, with that said, I think I've got everything out of my brain now. There's so many another part. It's just want to include that in there because it's like, God, there's so many. That's kind of my point. There should be so many signposts that you're drowning in them. That's what you want to do. All right, with that said, now I'll finally stop ranting on you. Create a nice rest of your day. Wait, that sounds wrong. I don't know. Create a nice day. Bye.